Chapter 591. Other than the hidden weapon, the primordial 13 arrows were Ninkei's most powerful weapon. It was more powerful than the great spirit in his body. It was because of the primordial 13 arrows that he could find hope in despair, and even make his opponents despair when facing enemies who were one level higher than him. With the help of the primordial 13 arrows, he had destroyed Longqing in the depths of the wilderness when he had just entered the see-through state. He had also been entangled with Yi Hongyu, who had entered the knowing destiny state for a long time. Without the primordial 13 arrows, he would have no choice but to admit defeat when facing Master Buoshu and Chang Ziqing, who were both at the middle level of the knowing destiny state. In the past, his enemies had different ways to deal with the primordial 13 arrows. Yi Hongyu relied on her meticulous and terrifying calculations during the battle. Longqing relied on his unique experience and foresight. Master Buoshu relied on the Yulan bell, a relic of Buddha. Chang Ziqing even broke his natal sword. This method could only be used once. However, Qin Yan's method was to use the ancient temple bell to distort the space. This was a powerful method that no one could imagine. Was this the highest level of the cultivation world? No matter how strong one's willpower was, he should be in despair at this moment. But Ninkei did not. He drew his bow again, like a full moon that did not exist in this world. He keenly captured the imperceptible gap in the rhythm of the ancient temple bell, and released the bowstring in a split second to shoot another arrow. This time the primordial 13 arrows found the gap in the rhythm of the bell. It was equivalent to finding the smooth and real space in the distorted space in front of the temple. Facing this arrow, Qin Yan looked calm and determined. He did not move, but his Zen thoughts moved again. Two extremely strong auras of Buddhism led the endless aura of heaven and earth to appear in the air beside him. Then, like two heavy doors of the ancient temple, they closed in front of him. The iron arrow shot into the air that was as viscous as water, and a black figure appeared like lightning. The speed of the iron arrow dropped sharply. It rubbed against the air at high speed and made a frightening sound. The body of the arrow burned and gave off a pungent smell of burning. Then it finally stopped. The iron arrow quietly floated in the air, 3 feet away from Qin Yan's face. Qin Yan frowned slightly. The iron arrow fell from the air. Before the iron arrow fell to the ground, Ninkei shot the third arrow. Qin Yan could no longer resist with his meditation. His hands, which had been hanging in the cotton kasaya, formed 2 residual shadows. He put his palms together in front of his chest as a Buddhist salute. The invisible mountain gate in front of him, which was formed by the Buddhist aura and the chi of heaven and earth, closed even tighter. The iron arrow fiercely shot into the formless mountain gate. A visible ripple appeared in the air in front of the hall, and then spread out in all directions. The iron arrow was right in the center of those ripples. Every circle of ripples represented a wave of impact. Qin Yan's stone-like face changed slightly, turned pale, then red, and then pale again. In an instant it changed 4 times in a row, exactly the same as the number of ripples the iron arrow made in the air in front of him. Ninkei's 4th arrow arrived. This iron arrow hit the tail of the 3rd iron arrow with unimaginable precision. The 2 arrows collided with each other, making a clear sound of iron striking. This iron arrow was like a heavy iron hammer in the 6th brother's hand. It smashed the 3rd iron arrow deeply into the air in front of Qin Yan. Qin Yan's meditation heart was slightly shocked. He lifted his heels, and his shabby cotton kasaya danced in the wind. He quickly flew back 30 feet. The straw sandals on his feet rubbed against the bluestone ground and scattered, leaving 30 feet of grass debris on the ground. At this time the 2nd iron arrow shot by Ninkei just fell to the ground, making a light sound. As the sound rang, Qin Yan's meditation heart was affected, and a stream of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. The world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect was actually injured by the primordial 13 arrows. People in the back temple were shocked speechless when they saw this scene. Qin Yan looked at Ninkei quietly with a serious expression, but his eyes became complicated. There was some pity, some regret, and some sorrow. Ninkei did not know what the monk was thinking. He just wanted to kill the monk. So he did not stop and continued to shoot the 5th arrow. Just when he put the arrow on the string, Qin Yan moved his psyche again. This time his psyche was not to defend but to attack. The attack of mercy was still an attack. This was Qin Yan's first real attack today. A Buddha statue appeared in front of Ning Quebec. He knew that this was his spiritual world. Qin Yan's Zen psyche had already come to his sense of perception. Ning Ke knew how powerful his psyche power was. So even if he knew that the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect had amazing Zen psyche, he was still not afraid. He was prepared to use his psyche power to mercilessly crush the dhyana thought that the other had sent over and deal a heavy blow to the other. He was even prepared to use this dhyana thought to counterattack. However, the next moment he found that he had lost all desire to fight. It was not that he did not have the will to fight, but he did not have the desire to fight. In front of the golden Buddha statue full of mercy and peace, not only the desire to fight, but also the competitive and violent aura. All the negative emotions seemed to have disappeared. Looking at the Buddha sitting in front of him, Ning Ke's state of mind was peaceful, and he did not have any desire to fight at all. Vaguely, a voice kept ringing in his ears. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Ning Ke had told Master Bueshu in the hall that he did not believe in Buddhism. There were people in the academy who read Buddhist scriptures and even senior brothers who practiced Buddhism. However, no one in the back mountain believed in Buddhism, or even looked down on the Buddhism sect. This deep-rooted belief originated from youngest martial uncle, and was carried forward by second martial brother. Ning Ke followed his youngest uncle and admired his second brother. He also inherited the legacy of Master Lotus, who regarded the Buddhism sect as a turtle. Therefore, even though he had learned Buddhism Dharma in the Lank Temple, cultivated the mantra emblematic gesture, and was touched by Master Qishan, he still could not believe in Buddhism and maintained a contemptuous attitude. Even if a real Buddha dared to stand in his way, he would shoot him with an arrow or cut him with a knife. Moreover, the Buddha statue in front of him was just a fake Buddha. Faith was the foundation of all Dharma in the world. Disbelief was the foundation of breaking the Dharma. Ning Ke looked back at Sang Sang, who was lying weakly on his shoulder. If there was a Buddha, then this was the real Buddha. Then he looked at his hand. It was not a butcher's knife in his hand, but an iron bow. So he stood up and pulled the bow again. In the deepest part of the world, Master Lotus' satisfied laughter could be heard. The solemn Buddha statue in front of the iron arrow gradually disappeared. Only a moment had passed in the Lank Temple. Ning Ke paused for a moment, but he still shot the fifth arrow. Qin Yan's expression changed slightly, and then he realized that the disciples of the academy were crazy non-believers. He could not help but sigh. Ning Ke's fifth arrow did not have a sharp arrowhead, but a small iron can. He had used too many small iron cans in the autumn rain in front of the Red Lotus Temple. He had used another one to deal with Master Bueshu in the hall. This was the last one. The air waves splashed and the roar was like thunder. The monks on the stone platform at the back of the temple were shaken by the blast, but they still maintained the posture of pressing their palms together and kept chanting the scriptures. The beam in front of the hall was hit again, and with a cracking sound it seemed like it was going to collapse. The thick and invisible mountain gate in the air was finally broken. Countless sharp pieces of iron whizzed past Qin Yan's body and pierced into him. The old cotton kasaya became even more tattered. Qin Yan's body was covered in countless wounds, and he was dripping with blood. However, his expression was still calm and determined. Ning Ke pulled the bow again. His hands had begun to tremble, but his voice did not. I don't believe in heresy, so I naturally don't believe in Buddha. If you are not willing to fight, then I want to see if I can shoot you to death. At this moment, a bell rang from the back of the horse carriage. Master Bueshu, who had lost an arm, struggled to crawl in a pool of blood. His fingers touched the Yulan bell. The bell in the Lank Temple rang loudly. The light of Buddha that descended from the peak of Hua Mountain became thicker and fell on the black horse carriage. In the horse carriage, the big black umbrella became thinner and thinner, and the ribs began to tremble and squeak. Even the black umbrella showed fear for the first time in the face of the Supreme Buddha's power. Sang Sang vomited blood again. Ning Ke's face was pale. He suddenly turned and shot an arrow into the hall. However, this arrow was shot at Qin Yan. Qin Yan had entered the Buddhist hall. He sat cross-legged in front of Master Bueshu, his eyes slightly lowered and his expression benevolent. That black iron arrow was deeply pierced into his chest. The tail of the arrow was still shaking at a high speed, making a soft buzzing sound. However, Qin Yan's expression did not change, as if he could not feel the pain. What was even more puzzling was that the powerful primordial 13 arrows could not penetrate this monk's body. The Dharmakaya of Akela. Master Qishan leaned against Monk Guanhai's arms and looked at the iron arrow in Qin Yan's chest. He looked extremely weak, but his eyes were filled with shock. He murmured, "Ning Ke. He has cultivated the Dharmakaya of Akela, give up." Qin Yan raised his head and looked at Ning Ke quietly, shaking his head. He still did not speak, but Ning Ke understood what he meant. "You are much stronger than the rumors say, but you can't shoot me to death." Master Buoshu sat in a pool of blood, his face pale but determined. He used his remaining arm to shake the bronze bell. The light of Buddha shone brightly. Sang Sang, who was on Ning Ke's back, kept vomiting blood. She seemed to have vomited out all the blood in her body. The blood she spat out was black and as thick as ink. Ning Ke pulled the bowstring and aimed at Buoshu. His face was pale and his fingers trembled slightly. The bowstring that was pressed against his lips trembled, and a thin cut appeared on his lips. A monk named Qin Yan was sitting cross-legged between him and the tree. He had just entered the knowing destiny state and was able to force the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect into such a situation, forcing him to summon his Dharmakaya at the cost of his Buddha's heart. This was something to be proud of. In a sense, today's battle finally proved that the Academy had defeated the Buddhism sect. He did not embarrass the Academy. But if the outcome could not be changed, then what was the point of everything? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 592. The Buddha's power continued to flow into the Yulan bell. Master Buoshu's eyes grew dimmer and dimmer. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, he no longer had the strength to activate it. He placed the bronze bell in a pool of blood beside his broken arm. The crisp sound of the bell disappeared, but the power of Buddha continued. The ancient bells beside the 17 halls of the Lank Temple continued to ring, and the light of Buddha steadily covered the black horse carriage. Songsong's face grew paler and paler. Her brows were furrowed as if they were about to break. She looked like she was in extreme pain. A stream of black blood flowed from the corner of her lips to her chest. Ning Ke knew that even if Sang Sang was not sick, they would not be able to defeat Qin Yan even if they joined forces with him and Mo Shanshan. That was why he did not continue to attack. "You can kill us now and give us a quick death." He looked at Qin Yan and said. Qin Yan shook his head slowly and looked at the light of Buddha on the black horse carriage. Ning Ke understood what he meant. It was not him who wanted to kill Sang Sang, but the Buddha who wanted to kill her. Doesn't the Buddha think this is cruel? Ning Ke followed the light of Buddha and looked at the distant peak of Hua Mountain. He looked at the stone statue of the Buddha in the autumn clouds. Master Buoshu, who was sitting in a pool of blood, softly chanted the name of Buddha. He said with a pale face, "Cruelty is mercy." Ning Ke said, "The mercy of others is cruelty to us? Hypocrite." Two voices suddenly rang out in the back temple of Lank. They said the exact same words. When these two voices rang out, the distant ringing of the bell seemed to be startled and paused for a moment. Yi Su, dressed in a thin robe and carrying a wooden sword, and Tang, dressed in a leather coat and looking indifferent, walked over from the stone platform in front of the temple. They looked calm, but no monk dared to stop them. When they reached the stone steps in front of the temple, Yi Su looked at Master Buoshu and said, "Killing is killing. The Buddha's killing is also killing. How can he be merciful? The Buddhism sect is indeed heretical and has lost its true nature." Qin Yan looked at Yi Su and Tang. He did not seem surprised and was as calm as before. Chang Lishua dashed out from the corridor and knelt before Yi Su. Yi Su didn't even look at him. He just focused on the black horse carriage and the little girl behind Ning Quebec. His expression became a little strange. He said, "It's really transparent." Master Buoshu knew the identity of the visitor. He forced a smile and said, "Since the Buddha is hypocritical, Mr. Yi can kill him." Yi Su shook his head and said, "You monks don't dare to do it. You only hope that the light of Buddha will descend to the world and kill the daughter of Yama. It's nothing more than thinking that if you want to do it, you have to kill Ning Quebec." It's hard to explain to the academy later. Master Bueshu used his left hand to press on his right shoulder where his broken arm was. A smile appeared on his pale face. Buddhism has always been silent and forbearing. We do not wish to offend the academy. Could it be that Taoism is also afraid of the academy? Yisu said, "This is the world of Haotian, and Haotian Taoism rules the world. What is there to fear? It's just that you Buddhists can use mercy as a shameless excuse, and I naturally have a reason not to act." Master Bueshu asked, "May I know the reason, Mr. Yi?" Yisu glanced at Ning Kei and said, "My sister has a good relationship with him." Master Bueshu did not expect the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, who was known for his arrogance and indifference, to have learned such a way of doing things. He was slightly startled and said, "It is indeed a good reason." Then the master looked at the strong man in the leather coat and said, "Why is the world wayfarer of Devil's Doctrine here?" Tang said expressionlessly, "To take a look." Master Bueshu asked, "To see what?" Tang said, "To see how you people from the Central Plains kill people." Master Bueshu forced a smile and said, "Although the Devil's Doctrine has been ostracized, it is still a part of the world. On the eve of the destruction of the world wayfarer is willing to come here. I think he is willing to do his part. Why don't you do it? If you kill the daughter of Yama, I think you will become a Buddha immediately." Tang glanced at Ning Kei and said, "If I want to kill the daughter of Yama, I have to kill Ning Kei first. But my sister has a good relationship with him, and I heard that she is even closer to the daughter of Yama." Master Bueshu sighed and said, "Then why are you here?" "Because they are also hypocrites. Although they want to kill Sang Sang, they don't want to kill me and offend the academy. Although they are world wayfarer of Taoism and Devil's Doctrine, they are still afraid of the academy." Ning Kei sat in the black horse carriage. Then he looked at Yisu and asked, "What does Haotian Taoism think of this?" Yisu shook his head and said, "I don't know." Ning Kei asked, "Do you believe it?" Yisu looked at the magnificent light of Buddha on the black horse carriage and said, "I have to believe it. Don't you think there is something strange about this?" Ning Kei looked into his eyes and asked, "The Buddhism sect discovered the daughter of Yama, but Haotian Taoism seems to know nothing. Even if the West Hill Divine Palace is not high enough, what about the Jisho Abbey? And don't forget, Sang Sang is the Lady of Light of Haotian Taoism. How did she suddenly become the daughter of Yama?" He spoke very quickly and clearly, without any strong fluctuations in his emotions, but everyone who heard him understood his intentions, and had no choice but to think in accordance with his intentions. Yisu thought about it and shook his head. "I don't understand." Ning Kei still did not give up. He looked at Tang and asked, "How did the academy treat you?" Tang said, "If Mr. Ku did not destroy the Enlightenment doctrine, it was not bad." Ning Kei smiled helplessly and continued, "The Enlightenment doctrine worships Yama." Tang looked at Sang Sang behind him and said after a moment of silence, "Worship does not represent faith. Most of the time it represents fear." Ning Kei said, "So you will not help me?" Tang said, "I will not help them either." Yisu said, "If the mute cannot keep you, I will still have to do it." Hearing Yisu and Tang's answers, Ning Kei relaxed. He let go of the iron bow in his hand, untied the rope and held Sang Sang in his arms. He held the big black umbrella and sat silently in the light of Buddha. An abbey, a temple, a school, and a two-story building. There were 4 unknown places in this world, so there were 4 world wayfarers. 4 world wayfarers gathered in the Lank Temple today, and Ning Kei was undoubtedly the weakest one. In this situation, even if he was possessed by youngest uncle's fighting will, it was impossible for him to escape with Sang Sang. So he relaxed a lot and held Sang Sang in his arms, holding the big black umbrella. Even though he knew that the big black umbrella would not last long, he could only wait in silence for the changes to happen. At this moment, Elder Chishan slowly stood up with the help of Monk Guan Hai, and walked to the front of the hall. The elder's seniority in the cultivation world was too high. Even the abbey dean of the Jisho Abbey treated him as a friend. So both Yisu and Tang bowed slightly to show their respect. Master Chishan ignored the 2 powerful world wayfarers and just looked at Qin Yan. His emotions became very complicated. He said, "So it was all arranged by you." Qin Yan was silent and his expression was calm. Master Qishan's body swayed slightly and his face looked older. He said sadly, treating the daughter of Yama was an agreement between you and Mr. First. That's why these stories happened. However, who would have thought that the Arhat would go back on his word? No wonder Baoshu could leave the Xiankong temple with the cleansing bell. No wonder so many people came to the Lang temple today. No wonder everyone knew that the little girl was the daughter of Yama in the blink of an eye. I could have cured her. Master Qishan looked at Qin Yan and said sadly, you also promised Mr. First to let me treat her. But in the end you still could not break your obsession and wanted her to die. But have you ever thought that you could fool everyone before you lied? But once you started, how could you fool Mr. First? Yisu listened to the bell in the Lang temple, and looked at the invisible Buddhist array above the temple. He seemed to be deep in thought. He turned to look at Qin Yan and said, how can it be explained by obsession? All of this started from the conversation you had with Mr. First in the snow forest by the lake in Chang, and last winter, right? Qin Yan still did not speak. You know that Mr. First looks dull, but he is actually very smart. He can figure out what is going on with just a little calculation. That is why you have been hiding since last winter. You only took action when Ningke and the girl came to the Lang temple. You want this light of Buddha in this big array. You have calculated that even if Mr. First finds out that something has changed, he will not be able to enter the temple to stop you. Yisu looked at Qin Yan and shook his head slowly. It was hard to tell if he was admiring or regretting. He said, I did not expect the Buddhism sect to have such a great schemer like you after Lotus. What a pity and a pity. South of Chang'an at the back of the mountain of the academy. In front of the precipice the flowing clouds were like silk. The cold autumn wind blew against the cliff, causing the wisteria that had not fallen to the ground to sway. It looked like the copper bells hanging under the eaves of the Buddhist temple. The headmaster, dressed in black, sat on the edge of the cliff and looked to the southeast. He suddenly said, something happened there. Eldest brother had followed his teacher to the back cliff to brew wine today. He was making preparations when he heard this. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Today was the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, and youngest brother and Miss Sangsang were in Lang Temple. The autumn wind blew against the black robe. The headmaster was about to get up. Eldest brother knelt down behind the headmaster and whispered something anxiously. Then he said, everything happened because of my stupidity and ignorance. I will bring youngest brother back. After saying this, the autumn wind blew again. The headmaster looked into the distance and said slowly, I've always been a weak person. Because I couldn't understand certain things, I always wavered between the two sides. Because of the uneasiness, I don't want to be entangled with that little girl's fate. Manmang, you went against your nature to target a weak girl. Now you're even threatening me with your life. You must have seen that shadow? Eldest brother was not on the cliff platform. The headmaster felt a little lonely. He looked back at the wisteria hanging on the corridor and the entangled branches. He suddenly laughed and said, but in fact they were entangled long ago. Praise for the chapter name. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 593. There was no wind in Chang'an today. On the towering city wall, a flag drooped weakly. Suddenly, the flag fluttered and danced, as if to tell the people of the country that they were about to go to war. In the eagle's nest between the blue stones of the city wall, a male eagle was feeding its chicks. Suddenly it sensed a terrifying aura. Its feathers fluttered and it looked back into the sky in fear. But it saw nothing but autumn clouds. In the verdant valley in the south of the Tang Empire, a carriage was traveling alone on the official road. Suddenly, dozens of round gravel rolled on the road, almost startling the horse. Passing through the valley and across the bridge of Qinghe County, a strong wind suddenly blew in the vast great swamp. The white autumn reeds in the water fell, as if they were submitting to some power. In the Taoist temple in the capital of the kingdom of Qi, the old priest stood by the stone window and looked at the conspicuous white line in the blue autumn sky. The wrinkles on his face were filled with fear as he prayed silently in his heart. In the sword garret of the South Jin kingdom, at the bottom of the dark cave in the belly of the mountain, In front of an ordinary hut beside a quiet small pond, the most powerful man in the world slowly raised his head and looked at the sky. The sword in the hut began to buzz and tremble. In the distant South Sea at the edge of the volcanic island, waves kept crashing against the black reefs. The figure of the Taoist in indigo was faintly discernible between the waves and the rocks. He looked at the direction of the land and shook his head. There was no wind in the world, but there was wind. The wind came from Chang, and drew a straight line between heaven and earth. It went straight to the Tile Mountain in the southeast, and passed by some scenic spots in the kingdom of Qi along the way. On a remote mountain road in that scenic spot, 2 horses were slowly moving forward. A man with a tall hat sat on the horse in front, and a little servant with a sword sat on the horse behind. Feng Luo was in the Lang Temple. The hidden light of Buddha tactical array sensed the approaching wind and reacted in an instant. The pale golden light of Buddha formed a semicircular Vajra shield, covering the entire ancient temple. The yellow-robed monks in the temple sat cross-legged on the ground, closing their eyes to meditate. They kept chanting the Akalanatha scripture, and the 17 ancient bells rang louder and louder. The wind wanted to enter the Lang Temple, but it was blocked by the light of Buddha tactical array. Thus there was a collision. A loud bang resounded. It was like a divine messenger of Haotian, waving a divine hammer mixed with lightning and dark clouds, and smashing it against the Buddha's Vajra shield that shrouded the Lang Temple. The terrifying power reverberated in the Lang Temple. Dozens of yellow-robed monks guarding the light of Buddha tactical array spat out blood. The courtyard was filled with blood marks. The sound of the collision was so loud that even the distant bell was drowned out. The cultivators in the temple covered their ears and screamed. They knelt on the ground, unable to get up. This was the Lang Temple's light of Buddha tactical array. It was based on the light of Buddha from the Hua Mountain Buddha statue, supported by the ancient temple's countless years of Buddha nature, protected by dozens of yellow-robed monks, and presided over by Qi Nian, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. However, under the impact of the aura, it actually showed signs of collapsing. Just how powerful was that aura? It even gave off a feeling that it wasn't a realm that should exist in the mortal world. What frightened the people in the temple even more was that after such a strong attack was blocked by the light of Buddha tactical array, the person did not stop at all. He continued to rush into the temple. Dozens of aura vortexes caused by the collision appeared on the light shield almost at the same time. In a very short period of time, the light of Buddha tactical array withstood countless attacks. It was like a piece of metal that was being tossed and turned by an iron hammer. It kept twisting and distorting and was in danger. The cultivators in the temple knelt on the ground and covered their ears in pain. Some of the weaker ones could not bear the impact and vomited desperately. The yellow-robed monks suffered the most direct impact. Some of their eyes even began to bleed. They continued to chant scriptures, and their voices became extremely hoarse, as if they were crying. Yisu's expression was slightly stern. He looked up at the chaotic aura flowing on the light of Buddha tactical array. He thought silently that he had taken the person seriously enough, but he did not expect him to be more powerful than he had imagined. Tang also looked up at the sky. Looking at the white dents caused by the impact on the invisible light shroud, he recalled the first time he saw that man in the wilderness. He could not connect the gentle, respectful, and even somewhat wooden man beside the ox cart with what he was seeing now. Qi Nian's expression became very solemn, but he was the only one in the temple who could keep calm. He knew that it was impossible to hide this from the person, and that the person would come sooner or later. The world only knew about the world wayfarer, but they did not know that he, Yisu, and Tang only had eyes for that person. For many years no one had ever seen that person fight, and they did not know what state he had reached. Today he finally confirmed it. He was in awe, but he still maintained his strong confidence. The Buddhism sect had prepared for a long time for this day. They were prepared for all kinds of situations. No matter how powerful that person was, he was only a person and a good person. Qi Nian raised his arm and calmly flicked his finger. A pure Buddha nature flew through the air and landed on an ancient bell beside a plum tree in a side hall of the temple. The bell rang again. The 17 ancient bells rang again. The stone statue of Buddha on the peak of Hua Mountain shed more light of Buddha. Illuminated by the light of Buddha, The yellow-robed monks on the stone platform woke up one after another. They did not have time to wipe the blood off their faces. They sat down on the scattered lotus seats and closed their eyes to meditate. No matter how the ground shook, how their facial organs bled, and how painful their bodies were, they kept chanting the Akalanatha Sutra. The hymn says, "Just like a man holding an oil bowl, he does not give up." The hymn says, "Wisdom is like the sea, he holds the oil bowl with concentration." The hymn says, "Aspiration does not let go, nirvana but self-control." The monks' robes fluttered, and the chanting continued. The yellow-robed monks kept chanting, and their voices gradually merged into one, appearing extremely grand and bright. A sense of pious martyrdom gradually spread in the temple. Under the constant impact from the outside, the light of Buddha was about to collapse. Accompanied by the chanting and the continuous injection of the light of Buddha, the formation of the light of Buddha barely survived and gradually stabilized. Under the big black umbrella, Ninkei looked up at the light shroud that enveloped the Lank temple. He looked at the dense swirls of air on the light shroud that were like stars. His face was expressionless, but his eyes suddenly brightened. He looked at the dying Sangsang in his arms and raised his hand to wipe the black blood from the corner of her mouth with his sleeve. He said, "Senior brother is here. Hold on for a while and we can get out." Sangsang opened her eyes with difficulty and asked weakly, "Which senior brother?" Ninkei said, "Eldest brother." Ever since Songsong's identity as the daughter of Yama was exposed, he had never doubted the academy. He believed that senior brother would definitely come to save him and Sangsang, but he did not know whether it would be eldest brother or second brother. Since the person outside the Lank temple had come so quickly, it must be eldest brother. Hearing that it was eldest brother, Sangsang smiled with difficulty and was somewhat happy. If it was second brother, she would be grateful because second brother had always loved her. But she knew that eldest brother of the academy had never liked her. Ninkei looked out of the carriage at the stone ground in front of the temple, and at the yellow-robed monks who were determined to die for a just cause. He knew that these monks were burning their own lives. After all, they could not keep eldest brother outside forever. "My senior brother is here. What do you plan to do?" He looked at Qin Yan and asked. Qin Yan looked at the light of Buddha array above his head quietly and did not answer his question. If Buddha wants to reincarnate someone who does not belong to this world, then even the headmaster of the academy cannot stop him. Moreover, the Buddhism sect wants to reincarnate the daughter of Yama, not Mr. 13. Even if Mr. First breaks the array and enters later, what else can he do to us other than save you? Master Bueshu said with difficulty and smiled. Qin Yan suddenly looked at Yi Su. Yi Su said, "He is indeed the most powerful person of our generation. But as Chief Monk said, he has a gentle temperament and has never killed anyone in his life. So he is not dangerous and easy to fool. Even if we fool him, he will only suffer in the end and will not do anything to the other party." He looked at Qin Yan and said, 16 years ago, you chewed your own tongue into your stomach. Since then, no one in this world knows what you are thinking, including the headmaster of the academy. Now it seems that you really think too much. You have calculated his temperament and state too accurately. It is said that before he entered the academy, he lived in a small town and raised a few fish in the stone pond in front of his house. Then those fish were eaten by his neighbor. He went to ask his neighbor and the neighbor told him that the fish swam away by themselves. He actually believed it and looked at the stone pond with only clear water left. He sighed with regret and said, "Fish, oh fish, why did you swim away? Why did you disappear?" Yi Su looked at Qin Yan and said, "You are the neighbor who stole the fish. This is probably how a gentleman can be deceived. But have you ever heard of eldest brother of the academy being as angry as he is today?" After saying this, he sighed and his thin sleeves slid down from his wrists. He stretched out his palm towards the sky and an exquisite aura of Haotian Taoism was injected into the light of Buddha array above the temple. In front of the Lank temple, dozens of monks fell to the ground and looked at a scholar at the bottom of the stone steps in horror. The scholar was wearing a shabby cotton-padded jacket, with a book at his waist and a wooden dipper tied to his hand. His entire body was covered in dust, but he seemed clean from his body to his heart. The scholar lowered his head slightly and one could faintly see that his face was pale. Bloodstains gradually appeared on his body and there were many tears on his tattered cotton jacket, with cotton coming out of the holes. From the moment he appeared in front of the Lang temple, the scholar had not moved. He stood quietly at the bottom of the stone steps and maintained the same posture. Only when the autumn wind occasionally brushed against his clothes and brought up a residual shadow did it show that he had been moving. But he moved so fast that no one could see him. On the light of Buddha array, countless white whirlpools bloomed. Each whirlpool represented a collision between the scholar and the entire Buddhism sect. With the countless collisions in an instant, the old temple shook more and more uneasily, as if it was about to collapse. The dust on the scholar's body also decreased and he looked cleaner and cleaner. I have sent 2 chapters today. They are written very seriously and give me goosebumps. After the battle between Wei Guangming and Yen Sei, the realm above the 5 states finally officially appeared in the world, strongly calling for monthly votes. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 594. 16 years ago, in the official of council's mansion in Chang'an, a favored concubine gave birth to a black baby girl who was judged to be an evil spirit by her wife. In the woodshed not far away, Ning Ke picked up a hatchet and started killing. In the distant northern wilderness, a black ravine appeared. The young Taoist Yisu, the young devil's doctrine Tang, and the young monk Qin Yan were watching the ants moving under the tree outside the black line. They watched for a long time in fear and did not dare to take even half a step forward. At the other end of the black line, a scholar was reading by the pond. When he was tired, he would take a short break. When he was thirsty, he would untie the wooden dipper at his waist and drink water. He was covered with dust and looked happy. 16 years later, Ning Ke no longer used a hatchet to kill people. He was used to iron bows and arrows. Sang Sang was still black, but her face was pale. She leaned weakly in Ning Ke's arms and watched the big black umbrella become thinner and thinner under the light of Buddha. She silently waited for the final moment to come. The teenagers had grown up and become the most powerful beings in the cultivation world. Yisu gradually became less arrogant and indifferent. Tang seemed to have not changed at all. The one who changed the most was Qin Yan. He had not spoken for many years, as if he was going to become a real mute. The scholar stood at the bottom of the stone steps outside the Lang temple. His old robe fluttered slightly and the wooden ladle tied to his waist swayed gently. The dust gradually dispersed and he looked calm. After 16 years, the people who had gathered because of the birth of the son of Yama, or maybe they did not know that they had gathered again because of the awakening of the daughter of Yama. The passage of time and the changes of the world always made people sigh with emotion. The chanting echoed in the courtyard of the back temple of the Lang temple. The yellow-robed monks on the stone ground were covered with blood, but they were extremely merciful. Their voices had long been hoarse and sounded like crying, but they were extremely solemn. The light of Buddha array was still struggling under the almost miraculous high speed and intensive attacks of the eldest brother of the academy. It became even more stable when Yisu raised his right hand and injected the Taoist aura into the array. Qin Yan looked at the direction of the temple at the foot of the mountain. His eyes were firm and dignified, but his expression became calmer and calmer. He knew that his plan was about to succeed, and the human world could finally get rid of the terrible prospect of destruction. Although he could not see what was happening outside the Lang temple, Ning Ke knew that eldest brother must have done his best. However, as more and more Buddha's light seeped down from the big black umbrella and Sang Sang was dying in his arms, he could not help but feel anxious and even desperate. If eldest brother was still unable to break the light of Buddha array of the Lang temple when the big black umbrella was destroyed, then Sang Sang would be purified into a wisp of green smoke by the light of Buddha. Ning Ke never knew how to write despair. If he was the only one facing danger, just as he had always told himself, what was the use of despair if he was really going to die? However, if it was Sang Sang who was facing the danger of death, he could not help but despair, because if Sang Sang died, he would still be alive and that would be the real pain. At this moment, The old and tired voice rang in his ears again. Previously in the hall, before Master Bushu shook the Yulan bell, this voice had also sounded. If Mr. First cannot break the array and the big black umbrella can no longer hold, you will rush to me with Sang Sang. If Mr. First breaks the array, no matter how afraid Qin Yan and Yi Su are of the academy, they will definitely kill you and Sang Sang first. So at that moment you will also have to rush to me. Master Qishan was supported by Monk Guan Hai, leaning weakly against the messy stone steps. He lowered his head and panted painfully. No one noticed that his lips were moving slightly. Ning Ke guessed that this was some kind of secret technique of the master that could only be heard by him. He did not turn around but only looked out of the corner of his eye. He saw the master's skinny palm fall on the chessboard. It was the chessboard left by Buddha. Master Qishan's voice rang again. Find a way to make the light of Buddha on the top of Tile Mountain dim, and then I will open the chessboard realm for you to hide temporarily. As long as you can successfully enter, even the abbey dean or the chief preaching monk will not be able to destroy the chessboard left by Buddha. After Mr. First enters the temple, I will ask Guan Hai to hand the chessboard to him and bring it back to the academy. I believe the headmaster will definitely find a way to release you. The Lang Temple was facing an opponent with the highest state in its history, Mr. First of the academy, who was even higher than Lotus. Ning Ke, who stayed in the temple, was the world wayfarer of the academy and had improved his state very quickly. He had even injured Qin Yan earlier, but his strength was still far from the truly powerful world wayfarer. Sang Sang had not yet awakened and was suppressed by the light of Buddha. She was at her weakest, so no matter the monks in the temple, Qin Yan and the others, they all focused on the gate of the temple, and no one noticed the change in his expression. Because he was too nervous, Ning Ke did not notice some details in Master Qishan's words. Master Qishan said that he would ask Guan Hai to hand the chessboard to eldest brother, and that he would entrust the solution to the chessboard to the headmaster. Ning Ke, I only hope that no matter what happens in the future, you will not become a second Lotus. You can be Mr. Ku, you can be anyone, but don't be junior brother Lotus because that is too painful. Master Qishan's weak and regretful voice rang in Ning Ke's mind. Ning Ke was silent for a moment and slightly lowered his head. Suddenly at this moment, the front, middle and back temples of the Lang Temple shook uneasily. Countless plum trees were suddenly smashed, and countless temple walls were smashed into powder. The 17 ancient bells were silent, and the light of Buddha array was broken. Someone broke into the temple gate, and monks were thrown into the air wherever he passed. More than a dozen cultivators were thrown into the air with blood spurting out of their mouths, and several stone statues of Buddha were thrown into the air. The people in front of the back temple could not see the specific scene at the foot of the mountain. They could only see a billowing cloud of dust roaring towards them. Everything in front of the cloud of dust was thrown into the air. There was a flash of surprise in Qin Yan's eyes. Yi Su's face became unusually solemn. Tang, who had been silent, suddenly raised his head. His eyes seemed to be burning, and he was full of fighting spirit. Even Mr. First of the academy could not break this light of Buddha array. Who was it? Somewhere in the kingdom of Qi. This was the most famous local scenic spot, but this part of the mountain road was the most remote corner. Few people came here, so the sound of hooves could be heard clearly when the two unusually handsome white horses walked on it. Second brother Junemo sat on the white horse. He wore a high hat and a broad belt and looked quite handsome. However, he was a little old-fashioned and upright. No matter how the horse shook, his upper body remained absolutely straight. The little attendant rode on the white horse behind, and he looked even more adorable with the tall and handsome horse. He looked forward and asked in a puzzled voice, "Young master, why did we suddenly go down the mountain?" Second brother said, "Teacher told me a few days ago that senior brother wanted to trick youngest brother and Sang Sang into going to the Lang Temple for treatment. But I thought that senior brother and Qishan were too honest to lie. I was worried that youngest brother would see through the problem and secretly run away with Sang Sang. So I have to stay at the foot of the mountain and be ready to catch him at any time." The little attendant thought that if Mr. First and Master Qishan said that they were too honest to lie, young master with his temperament would not be able to lie either. How could he be qualified to say anything to others? Then how long do we have to stay here? Second brother said again, if old monk Chishan does not like to boast and lie like other bald donkeys, then we should be able to cure Song Song's illness in 3 months. After a short pause he continued, if we really want to enter the chessboard, youngest brother will definitely follow. Then we have to wait for 2 years, or bring the chessboard back to the academy. Even if old monk Chishan is slightly better than other bald donkeys, he must be equally greedy. I am afraid that he will not let us take the chessboard away. The little attendant said with a bitter face, do we really have to stay here for 2 years? Second brother said seriously, Jialuan, as the saying goes, reading 10,000 books is not as good as walking 10,000 miles. This mountain is adjacent to the Hua Mountain. Although it is not as famous as the Hua Mountain, the scenery is better. Follow me and walk here for 2 years. Enjoy the scenery and clear your mind to help your cultivation. Maybe you can walk 10,000 miles. The little attendant sighed helplessly. He thought that it was not bad to walk 10,000 miles, but if they had to walk around the same mountain every day and see the same scenery for 10,000 miles, who else could stand it except the young master? At this moment there was a sudden gust of wind. Second brother looked up at the sky and frowned slightly. Suddenly, he had an idea and shouted with a cold face, you are courting death. He stretched out his hand and waved. The sword box in the little attendant's arm suddenly flew into his hand. Second brother stepped lightly on the horse's back and landed in the dense forest beside the mountain road with his wide sleeves fluttering. The little attendant shouted anxiously, young master, this is not the right way to the Lank Temple. The straightest way is the shortest, and the shortest way is the right way. Second brother's voice came from the forest and gradually faded away. When the words the right way reached the little attendant's ears, he had already disappeared. Eldest brother looked at the Lank Temple in front of him. His cotton-padded jacket was already riddled with countless holes, and the torn cotton was already stained with blood. In a very short period of time, he had collided with the light of Buddha array that covered the Lank Temple thousands of times. The light of Buddha array was trembling and his body had also suffered great damage. He still could not enter the Lank Temple. His gaze followed the light of Buddha and looked at the stone statue of Buddha on the peak of Hua Mountain. His heart slightly moved. At this moment suddenly a cloud of green smoke rushed from afar, splashing countless dust and gravel. It was travel-worn. Junemo came to the front of the Lank Temple. He was covered in dust, even more than the dust on eldest brother's tattered cotton-padded jacket. However, the tall ancient crown on his head was still straight and did not move at all. The two brothers looked at each other and did not speak. Junemo whistled. The autumn trees outside the Lank Temple trembled and green leaves fell. On the Hua Mountain, red leaves fell all over the mountain. Junemo used his fingers as a sword and stabbed into the light of Buddha. He shouted wildly. His black hair under the high crown was blown back by the strong wind and danced wildly. His finger moved down the Buddha's light shield with great difficulty, and tore a tiny hole in the shield. A cotton on eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket suddenly trembled and left a shadow in the air. Eldest brother was no longer in front of the stone steps of the Lank Temple. In a flash, eldest brother entered the temple and came to the 17 halls. He appeared in the 17 halls almost at the same time. Under the eaves in the room in front of the porch, by the plum tree, eldest brother broke the 17 ancient bells in a row. The light of Buddha array was broken. For no reason I need a monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 595. Junemo stepped onto the stone steps and walked into the Lank Temple. His right foot landed on the stone steps and the stone steps shattered. His tall figure landed on the temple door, and the door shattered. When his gaze landed on the stone wall behind the door, the stone wall shattered. Just like how he had crossed the mountains to arrive at this ancient temple, he still chose to take the straightest path. Because that was the shortest path, he had really broken into the temple. After entering the ancient temple, Junemo did not walk on the smooth but crooked stone steps. He did not go around the winding corridors. He walked directly to the back of the temple. Regardless of whether it was the temple door, the stone wall or the solemn Buddhist hall, they could not block his way. Along the way, the walls collapsed and bricks and stones flew in all directions. He had forcefully carved out a path. The autumn wind couldn't move his ancient crown, but his black hair fluttered behind him like arrows. In front of him, even the stone statues of the venerables in the hall were shaken away, not to mention the people. Junemo walked very quickly. Along the way, the cultivators who tried to block his way were sent flying into the air. Some hung on the branches of the autumn trees and screamed. Some fell heavily on the bluestone ground and no longer made a sound. The bricks, wooden beams, and stones mixed with the figures of the people kept flying, forming a terrifying cloud of dust behind him. Looking at the cloud of dust that was rapidly approaching the back of the temple, Qin Yan's expression froze. He could guess who it was from the aura emitted from the cloud of dust. Since the light of Buddha array had been broken, no one in the front of the temple could stop or even slow down the other party. And the person he was most wary of should arrive faster than the cloud of dust. At this moment he could not hesitate. Even if he had to kill Ninkei first to kill the daughter of Yama, it meant that the Buddhism sect and the academy would form an unresolvable feud. He still had to act. Through Master Qishan's analysis, Ninkei knew that if eldest brother did not immediately come to his side after the array was broken, he would immediately face the destructive attacks of Qin Yan and even Yi Su. He really hoped that his eldest brother could appear in front of the black carriage at this moment. He really wanted to see that old cotton-padded jacket, and he wanted to see his eldest brother's gentle face. Since the light of Buddha's formation had been broken, his eldest brother should have immediately come to save him after destroying the 17 bells. Why hadn't he come? Looking at the endless cloud of dust coming towards the back of the temple, Ninkei knew that he would meet second brother in the next moment. However, he knew that he could not hesitate now, because Qin Yan and Yi Su would never hesitate and would never let him meet second brother. So he acted early. The iron bow in his hand suddenly bent, and the iron arrow was knocked on the bowstring. With a whoosh it shot out. Qin Yan knew very well what kind of monsters the students of the academy were. He knew that Ninkei would not give up until the last moment. So he was prepared and summoned the Dharmakaya of the Akalanatha again. But Ninkei's arrow was not aimed at Qi or Yi Su. He was aiming at the peak of the tile mountain, the Buddha statue surrounded by clouds. The dark iron arrow pierced through the skylight of the black carriage and followed the Buddha's light that descended from the sky. The arrowhead splashed with specks of Buddha's light and shot straight to the peak of Hua Mountain, which was several miles away. The Buddha statue stood on the peak of the tile mountain, with clouds and mist between its chest and abdomen. It was extremely tall and had endured the wind and rain for decades in silence, looking exceptionally solemn and merciful. The Buddha statue was huge. Its left palm was placed in front of its chest, and the tip of its finger could allow a goshawk to land. The right hand of the Buddha statue was facing the human world at the foot of the mountain. Its thumb and index finger seemed to be touching, as if they were pinching a flower. If it could really pinch a flower, it would be the biggest flower in the world. Since the Yulan bell rang, the light of Buddha had shrouded and suppressed Sangsang. It shot out from the right palm of the Buddha statue facing the human world. The primordial 13 arrows followed the light of Buddha and reached the peak of the tile mountain in an instant. A perfectly round arrow hole appeared in the right palm of the Buddha statue. The stone palm at the edge of the hole had faintly cracked like a spider's web. The splashing gravel pierced through the clouds, and no one knew how long it would take for it to fall to the peak. The light of Buddha was still descending, but because of the hole in the palm of the Buddha statue, the beam of light of Buddha was no longer as condensed as before. It became a little illusory and less powerful. In the back temple of Lank, looking at Ninkei, Tang raised his eyebrows and clenched his fists, but he still did not make a move. Yi Su's expression changed slightly. He stretched out his right hand from his thin sleeve and pointed at Ninkei's chest. His finger was a powerful Taoist sword. It stabbed at Ninkei's chest instead of between his eyebrows because he did not want to kill an academy student. He only wanted to injure Ninkei so that he would not protect the daughter of Yama. Ninkei stretched out his right hand from his black academy uniform and flicked a small ball of paper into the air. Yi Su thought that it was a talisman and his expression did not change. However, when the small ball of paper came into contact with his sword style, it instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke. Then an extremely cold sword style burst forth from within. The small ball of paper was not a talisman written by Ning Quebec. It was a letter that Yi Hongyu had written to Ning Quebec. On the paper was a sword that she had drawn. Yi Su sensed the sword style that was filled with unwillingness, and his expression changed again. The two sword styles clashed in the air, creating and destroying each other before turning into nothingness. At this moment, Master Qishan flipped the chessboard in front of him. An extremely quiet Buddha light burst out from the surface of the chessboard, which was neither made of gold nor stone. On the broken stone steps of the back hall, a hole about 20 feet high was broken open, and a deep passage could be vaguely seen in the hole. The big black horse, who was prepared, neighed wildly and dragged the carriage towards the quiet world of the light of Buddha. It knew that as long as it could enter, it would be temporarily safe. The black horse carriage was very close to the chessboard. It only needed a short time to enter successfully. Qin Yan and Yi Su, who were the top powerhouses in the cultivation world, would also need a very short time to kill Ning Quebec. At this moment, it all depended on whether Ning Ke could withstand the opponent's most powerful attack and survive this period of time. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like an impossible task. At this moment, Qin Yan's monk robe had already floated up. His body expanded into the air around him, completely following the shape of his body. It looked like a bigger Qin Yan. This external Dharmakaya was exactly the same as Qin Yan's body, only bigger. The only difference was the face. The face of the Dharmakaya was not as calm and determined as Qin Yan's. Instead, it was full of anger. Its eyebrows were like swords and its eyes were filled with lightning. No evil in the world dared to look at it. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha was fully revealed. Qin Yan, who was in the light of Buddha Dharmakaya, put his palms together and chanted silently. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha, which was as tall as the entire temple, was summoned by the mantra. It raised its right palm and slammed it towards the black horse carriage. It was as powerful as a falling mountain, causing the temple to tremble uncontrollably. The perfect combination of the Buddhist mantra and the Dharmakaya emblematic gesture was the real Buddhist mantra emblematic gesture. Facing the crushing power of the Buddhism sect, Ning Ke had no time to shoot a second arrow. He also knew that even if he shot the primordial 13 arrows, it would be meaningless because Qin Yan could not be killed at this moment. At this moment, Master Qishan shouted, "Fearless!" Master Qishan's shout woke Ning Ke up instantly. He thought of the long night when he was comprehending the mantra emblematic gesture in the temple. Instinctively, he put his palms together in front of him and bent his fingers to form a fearless mantra emblematic gesture. He faced the attack in the air. The real Buddhist mantra emblematic gesture should be the one that Qin Yan was using now. It was the perfect combination of the Buddhist mantra and the Dharmakaya emblematic gesture. Although Ning Ke had learned the emblematic gesture, he had only cultivated Buddhism for a short period of time. How could he understand the essence of the mantra? Logically speaking, his mantra emblematic gesture was no match for Qin Yan. It should be crushed immediately, and then the entire black horse carriage would be destroyed. However, no one expected that when Ning Ke's mantra emblematic gesture met Qin Yan's mantra emblematic gesture, it was not at a disadvantage at all. There was a loud bang. Blood seeped out of the corner of Ning Ke's mouth, and Qin Yan's body shook slightly. Under the broken corridor of the temple, Master Qishan's old voice sounded again. "Subdue the devil." Ning Ke bent his right palm and stretched it out in front of him. A gust of strong wind blew out of the black horse carriage and formed a solemn mantra emblematic gesture on the stone ground in front of the temple. It forcefully pushed back Qin Yan's second mantra emblematic gesture. Why would such a situation happen? Although Master Qishan had been ill for many years and his cultivation state was extremely weak, he was the unparalleled Buddha in the world. He had cultivated for many years and was compassionate. His Buddha nature was more profound than Qin Yan's. How could the master's mantra be weaker than Qin Yan's mantra? After Ning Ke joined the devil, his body became extremely strong under the cultivation of the Great Spirit. Although it was not as strong as the Akalanatha's Dharmakaya, it was equally strong when combined with Master Qishan's mantra. Master Qishan vomited blood and shouted again, "Go read it." Ninkei formed another emblematic gesture. At this time the Buddhist array had been broken. The sky, which had been suppressed for a long time, finally returned to its natural state. The autumn rain slowly fell from the clouds and fell on the dilapidated courtyard of the ancient temple. Amidst the autumn rain, the library directly opposite the Buddhist temple collapsed with a loud bang. Qin Yan's face showed a very determined expression. He ignored Ninkei's horrifying Buddhist mantra emblematic gesture and rushed toward the black horse carriage with the Akalanatha's Dharmakaya. He wanted to suppress it with his real body. With a light sound, the wooden sword behind Yisu finally came out of its sheath. It turned into a flowing light that had no sense and no meaning of life and death. It pierced the black horse carriage, and its target was still Sang Sang. At this time, the black horse carriage was very close to the chessboard in front of Master Qishan. The front hooves of the big black horse had already stepped into the quiet world of Buddha's light. Natural stream magical finger. Ninkei stretched out his right index finger and pierced it into the autumn rain. As he pointed, his face suddenly turned pale and his cheeks seemed to have become much thinner. Hearing the 5 words, natural stream magical finger, Qin Yan's expression changed again. The natural stream magical finger was a secret of the Jishou Abbey. Why did Ninkei know it? In a very short time, he thought that Chan Pippi must have secretly taught Ninkei this. He was shocked, but he continued to rush toward the black horse carriage with determination. Yisu knew that Chan Pippi would never teach Ninkei the natural stream magical finger. So his expression did not change, and he still pointed his sword at Sang Sang. Ninkei did not know the natural stream magical finger, but his finger still pointed into the autumn rain, and from left to right, he drew 2 seemingly ordinary straight lines. His black academy uniform suddenly turned into countless pieces and fell to the ground. He used a talisman which was so powerful that he could not control it. He used the infinitive talisman. He used the divine talisman. When he entered the knowing destiny state in the autumn rain in front of the Red Lotus Temple, he had already become a divine talisman master. The first infinitive talisman he learned from his master, Yensei, was also about cutting. This divine talisman was Ninkei's most powerful move, his trump card. Earlier in the temple, when Master Buoshu shook the cleansing bell, he had wanted to use this divine talisman, but he did not have the time. When Qin Yan and the other real powerhouses appeared, he knew that it would not make much sense to use this divine talisman. He must save it for the most critical moment. Although this divine talisman could not defeat Qin Yan or Yisu, it could definitely buy some time for him and Sang Sang. His divine talisman only had half of Master Yensei's talisman spirit. Naturally, it could not cut anything in the world, even space itself. But because it was relatively simple, it was more powerful. He drew in the autumn rain with his finger. A powerful talisman spirit lay in the air in front of the black horse carriage. 2 invisible sharp edges were faintly discernible in the rain. They were like iron chains across the river. They were also like an infinitely long and infinitely sharp sword. The autumn rain drifted to the front of the black horse carriage and cut it in half. The Dharmakaya of the Akalanatha, which seemed indestructible, had 2 extremely deep black lines on its chest. There were 2 straight wounds on Qin Yan's chest and abdomen, and blood was flowing. There were 2 deep white marks on the wooden sword that was stabbing toward the black horse carriage. In front of the 2 sharp lights released by this divine talisman, all the intruders would be cut in half and the injuries would be doubled. Master Yensei's most powerful natal divine talisman was the Jing Fu. Ninkei had only learned half of it, so his natal divine talisman was called the 2 horizontal talisman. On the 2nd floor of the academy, looking at the black horse carriage that was about to enter the quiet light of Buddha, Tang was slightly shocked, and Yisu's pupils shrank. They had seen Ninkei in the wilderness. At that time, this student of the academy was still thinking hard about how to break through the see-through realm. But who could have thought that he had become so powerful in less than 2 years? Qin Yan's face was slightly serious. No matter how powerful Ninkei's divine talisman was, it could not defeat them. But it could stop them for a while. Master Buoshu reached out to grab the bell, but he failed because he had lost too much blood. The situation was ever-changing. Just when everyone was on guard against Mr. First and Mr. Second of the academy, who had broken into the temple, Ninkei, who had been ignored by everyone, suddenly launched an attack, and he was so powerful. It seemed like a long time had passed, but in fact only 2 breaths had passed since the light of Buddha was broken. The earliest autumn rain had not yet fallen to the ground. The black horse carriage was about to disappear in the quiet light of Buddha. At this moment a sword flew from the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 596. A sword came from the sky and headed for the Lank Temple. There were clouds above the Tile Mountain. The sword broke through the clouds and pierced the ground with a few miles of cloud silk. The sword was so fast that one could not see its body. They could only see a stream of light. However, it did not seem to bother to hide its power. Therefore, the people on the ground knew that it was a sword. The Lank Temple was shrouded in autumn rain. The sword passed through the rain, ignoring Qin Yan and the others in the courtyard. It did not stop because of the approaching smoke and dust. It flew towards the black horse carriage. The terrifying talisman spirit of the 2 talisman remained in front of the black horse carriage. However, the sword did not care. It seemed to be extremely familiar with Yensei's talisman Taoism. It easily passed through and pierced Sangsang in the carriage. Ning Ke felt a sharp pain in his sense of perception. Sangsang opened her eyes. Her face was pale. Half of the black horse carriage had entered the peaceful light of Buddha. However, it seemed to stop there. The word unparalleled was not enough to describe the imposing manner of this sword that came from the heavens. This sword, or more accurately the owner of this sword, gave off a strong feeling that if he wanted to do something, he would definitely be able to do it. Because there was a reason. This was the principle of this sword. It made sense. Therefore, the sword that came from the sky crossed the rivers and mountains in the south of the continent in an instant. It broke through the clouds, passed through the autumn rain, ignored the shocked gazes of the people in the Lank Temple, and killed Sangsang. Ning Ke had seen a sword on a piece of paper. He had seen and even learned such a powerful sword momentum because it was a matter of course. He knew who the master of the flying sword was. He knew that it was meaningless to do anything in the face of the flying sword. Therefore, he only held Sangsang tightly in his arms and silently watched the peaceful light of Buddha in the carriage. The people in the Lank Temple looked at the sword in shock. Qin Yan silently chanted the name of Buddha. Yisu raised his eyebrows and Tang's face darkened. They had all guessed the origin of the flying sword. Facing the arrival of the daughter of Yama, even the most powerful man in the world could not remain silent. At the most critical moment of the battle between the Academy, Buddhism, Taoism and the Devil's Doctrine, the only one who could intervene so forcefully was naturally the strongest person in the world, Liu Bai, who cultivated in the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. The Sage of Sword Liu Bai's sword was naturally the strongest sword in the world. Since he had the intention to kill, the daughter of Yama would not be spared. Qin Yan silently chanted the name of Buddha and slowly lowered his head. If one were to use a rope ruler to measure, it would definitely be exactly 1 foot. Liu Bai looked at the scholar in front of him and suddenly laughed. He said, "Li Man, you are the fastest one. Why are you called Man?" Eldest brother said, "Because I am slow, that is why I am fast. Because so, I like this principle the most." Liu Bai reached out and scooped up some cold water from the pool, and sprinkled it on the ground in front of him. He said slowly, "The 1 foot in front of me is my world. Even the Abbey Dean and the chief monk of scripture dare not stand here. It is meaningless no matter how fast you are." Master Yensei once said this to youngest brother. "I have also heard of it." Eldest brother looked at his feet and said, "So I am standing 1 foot away from you. I have not taken a step forward." Liu Bai slowly raised his eyebrows. He squinted and asked, "You want to take a step forward?" Eldest brother said, "I want to have a try." Liu Bai said, "Even if the 1 foot in front of me is my world?" Eldest brother said, "If you have a sword in your hand, the 1 foot in front of you is your world. But your sword is not here." Liu Bai sighed with emotion and stretched out his hand in the air in front of him. In the dark belly of the mountain, the light from the cave at the top suddenly dimmed. The grass hanging under the eaves of the hut moved even though there was no wind. The water in the quiet pool was rippling even though there was no wind. A sword flew back from the sky. It turned into a flowing light from the cave at the top of the mountain and fell into Lu Bai's hand. Eldest brother bowed to thank him. Lu Bai looked at him quietly and asked, "You want to protect the daughter of Yama. Have you ever thought about how to deal with the underworld invasion?" Eldest brother said, "If the academy can't cure her, then the disciples of the academy will stand at the forefront of the human world and fight. We will either win the underworld invasion or we will all die. Then we won't have to worry about what to do." "That still makes sense," Lu Bai said. "But there is one thing that I still don't understand. If the headmaster wanted to protect the daughter of Yama, how could it become like this? Could it be that the underworld invasion still can't make the headmaster change his mind? Even if the whole world says that we can kill them, the headmaster will not be moved?" Eldest brother did not know how to lie, so he did not answer the question directly. He said, "When the teacher has something to do, the disciple will do it. When we can't do it, then we will bother the teacher." Lu Bai asked, "Can you still do it?" Eldest brother said, "If the Sage of Sword doesn't do it, maybe I can." Lu Bai looked at his pale face and calculated how much cultivation he had consumed today, and how badly he had been injured in the process. He frowned slightly and asked, "I want to know how many bones you have broken." Eldest brother answered honestly, 206. Lu Bai was startled and sighed. "You will die like this." Eldest brother shook his head and said, "At least I am not dead yet." Lu Bai sighed and said, "I used to think that after Mr. Ku, Junemo was the only lunatic in the academy. Now it seems that everyone in the academy is a bunch of F***king lunatics." Eldest brother said, "You flatter me, Sage of Sword." Lu Bai slowly sheathed his sword and said, "I will fight with you to my heart's content in the future." At this moment, the most powerful man in the world had already sensed that the aura of the daughter of Yama had disappeared from this world. He knew that the academy must have let her escape, so he did not bother to use his sword again. Lu Bai really wanted to fight with the scholar in front of him. But today, the scholar had traveled thousands of miles in such a short time and was already seriously injured. It was not an honorable victory, and he did not have the confidence to kill the scholar in front of him. Eldest brother thanked him sincerely. "Thank you, Sage of Sword. But I really don't know how to fight." It was quiet in the back temple of Lank. Master Chishan's skinny palm landed on the back of the chessboard. No one could imagine that such an inconspicuous chessboard could send a horse carriage to another world. Qin Yan walked in front of Master Chishan. Master Chishan looked at him and said weakly, "No one can destroy the chessboard of Buddha." Qin Yan shook his head and looked determined. His slightly pale lips slowly parted. Since the day the son of Yama came to the world 16 years ago, Qin Yan had chewed his tongue into his stomach to practice the silent meditation. He had never opened his mouth except when he laughed. At this moment he was naturally not in the mood to laugh. Then this meant that he was going to speak. Master Chishan guessed what he was going to do. His expression changed drastically. Buddha's chessboard could not be destroyed, but the Vedantas of the Buddhism sect who truly possessed Buddha's nature could sacrifice their own Buddha's nature to forcefully change the speed of time in the world of the chessboard. Even in the Xiankong temple, only the chief preaching monk had such an ability. Master Chishan did not think that Qin Yan had such an ability. It was not until now that he saw Qin Yan's lips slightly open that he was shocked to realize how terrifying Qin Yan's state would be after 16 years of silent meditation and breaking out of Zen. The door of the back temple of Lank suddenly exploded. A tall crown appeared in the smoke and dust. Let me talk about the updates. This month I will try to maintain 2 chapters a day. If I am in good condition, I will write 3 or more chapters. When I do not report to everyone, I will write 2 chapters. If I have to write more, I will report to everyone. Today I have some problems, so I write more slowly and painstakingly. There will be another chapter, but I really do not know when I will be able to write it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 597. Junemo walked into the back temple of Lank. The yellow-robed monks on the stone ground surrounded him while chanting. The iron pestles and copper bowls in their hands were thrown at him like raindrops. Some cultivators with higher states and faster reflexes also used their flying swords. Sometimes a quick reaction wasn't a good thing, just like this moment. Junemo waved his sleeves, and the chi of heaven and earth in the courtyard was thrown into chaos. Countless copper arms and iron pestles shot back, and those monks were smashed by their natal items until they were covered in blood. Some of them were about to die. Then he looked coldly at the cultivators with higher cultivation and faster reactions. Those cultivators immediately felt the pressure enter their bodies. More than a dozen flying swords were struck down by the autumn rain. Some cultivators' seas of consciousness were even shattered, and they vomited blood and died. Miserable howls could be heard on the stone platform. Broken limbs flew in all directions and blood flowed like a river. Even though the autumn rain was getting heavier, it could not be washed away in a short period of time. A thick smell of blood tore apart the tranquil atmosphere of the ancient temple. Yisu looked at the wooden sword quietly. The rain hit the surface of the sword and washed away the 2 white marks left by Ninkei's 2 talismans. Then he raised his head and looked at the man wearing a crown. Junemo saw that there was no longer a black horse carriage under the stone steps in front of the hall. He looked at the chessboard in front of Master Chishan and calmed down slightly. He felt a gaze on him and turned to look, just in time to meet Yisu's gaze. The two of them did not speak, their expressions indifferent. With a clang, Yisu unsheathed his wooden sword and stabbed at Junemo in the autumn rain. At this moment Junemo finally drew his sword. He had broken through the light of Buddha tactical array and walked into the Lank temple. Along the way, everything that stood in his way was shaken away. He had not drawn his sword because he had not met anyone worthy of his sword. Yisu was a Taoist wayfarer and a cultivation genius who had seen through life and death more than 10 years ago. Naturally, he was worthy of drawing his sword. Junemo wore a tall hat and a broad belt. His robe was loose, and it was impossible to see where the sword box was. But when his sword appeared, everyone in the temple could see it. This was because his sword was different from the swords of all the other swordsmen in the world. The body of the sword was extremely wide, so wide that it was hard to imagine. It did not look like a sword at all, but more like a square piece of metal. Such a square piece of metal was extremely conspicuous. It was difficult to miss it. Junmo's sword was meant for everyone to see. Mr. Second of the Academy and the sword of Haotian Taoism finally met in the autumn rain at the Lank temple. Yisu's sword was traceless, soundless, emotionless, and senseless. Walking in the autumn rain, it was as if it had become the real autumn rain. It could moisten everything silently, but it did not have the mercy of the spring rain on life. Junmo's sword, on the other hand, moved in a straight line in the rain. Every time he reached the end, he would seriously violate the rules of sword controlling in the heart of a cultivator and suddenly turn back, still moving in a straight line. Yisu's sword of Tao was the slightest cold wind and the lightest autumn rain. It could enter everything in the world. Junmo's iron sword was square to the extreme. Wind and rain could not enter it. In an extremely short period of time, the wooden sword and the iron sword collided countless times in the rain, but it also seemed like they didn't collide even once. The autumn rain was forced to fly sideways by these two powerful sword moves. Suddenly, Junmo's expression turned cold. He turned around and dashed towards the temple without hesitation. At this moment, Yisu's wooden sword was moving unstoppably in the autumn rain, and was about to reach the area 3 zhang behind him. Junemo looked at Qi Nian in the temple with a pale face. He waved his wide sleeves behind him. The square and wide iron sword whistled back from the west wall of the temple. It no longer drew a square pattern like before, but began to draw a simple straight line. It looked straighter and harder, and therefore more powerful. Yisu looked at Junemo, who was walking towards the temple. He turned around indifferently and no longer looked at him. Instead, he looked at the courtyard wall at the back of the temple and the eaves at the bottom of the slope. There was a hint of lightning in his eyes. Junemo walked towards the dilapidated temple, while Yisu looked at the courtyard wall and the eaves. They were both the most powerful and the proudest of the younger generation. If they wanted to look, they would look at each other. If they didn't, they would turn around. The rain clouds above the Lang temple were getting brighter. Lightning struck and thunder roared. The wooden sword passing through the autumn rain seemed to be struck by lightning. It shone and continued to stab towards Junemo with the power of wind and thunder. The iron sword and the wooden sword finally collided at a visible level. The autumn rain dispersed and thunder roared. Yisu's swordsmanship seemed to have understood the truth of the world, and was even half a step into the state of Tianqi. Junemo still did not look back. He was still rushing towards the temple. He did not have his own rules, nor could he borrow the power of Haotian like other cultivators. However, he and his iron sword believed in a certain rule. It was so indestructible that the rule, in a sense, had become his own rule. That rule was the order. What his iron sword protected was absolute order. Qin Yan's lips were a little pale. They were soaked in the autumn rain and still looked a little dry. When they moved slightly, they were like withered leaves in the rain, gently trembling. The people around the stone steps in front of the temple were extremely shocked. Their expressions changed dramatically because they knew that they would soon see the legendary silent meditation in the cultivation world being broken with a single sentence. Qin Yan, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, had been practicing silent meditation for 16 years and had never broken it. Even in the snow forest by the lake in Chang'an, when he faced the mysterious 23-year cicada cultivation master of the Devil's Doctrine, he still did not break it. One could imagine what it meant to break it after 16 years of silent meditation. Qin Yan's lips opened slightly and half of his broken tongue could be vaguely seen. His expression was very calm and he said a word softly. Because he had not spoken for a long time, it seemed a little unclear. Gee. He said it so casually that no one could feel it. It was like the first word spoken by someone who had not spoken for 16 years. It was very different from what people had imagined. It was quiet in the back temple of Lank. The stone statue of Buddha on the peak of Hua Mountain seemed to have heard the word. The face of Buddha, which was carved from stone, suddenly became vivid and extremely compassionate. There was a hole in the right palm of the stone statue, which was facing the foot of the mountain. The primordial 13 arrows had made a hole. The hole did not change. Instead, the light of Buddha from the palm disappeared. The light of Buddha appeared on Qin Yan's body. His gaze fell on the chessboard. The ground of the old temple began to shake violently. The monks and cultivators who were lying in pools of blood were shaken into the air. Countless cracks appeared on the walls of the middle temple and the front temple. A mute bell, which was swinging slightly by the plum tree outside the temple, suddenly suspended in the air. Dense cracks appeared on the surface of the ancient bell, and then it exploded like a flower. The bell cracked like a tile. The plum tree turned into snow. In the autumn rain, second brother's black hair and ribbons danced behind him. He was extremely angry. Then, he did something that no one could have imagined. Even the equally proud Yisu could not have imagined. He reached out to recall his wide and square iron sword. He did not even care about the Taoist sword behind him that carried the power of wind and thunder. With an angry roar, he threw the iron sword at Qin Yan, who was in front of the temple. Junmo's action was equivalent to leaving his back to Yisu. He was the proud and powerful Mr. Second of the academy. But leaving his back to Yisu, who was half a step into the Tianqi state, was no different than committing suicide. Yisu looked at the temple wall that was wet by the autumn rain and sensed the changes behind him. He suddenly became serious and thought in shock, this person has a strong will. Junemo withdrew his sword, which was an invitation for Yisu to kill him. He was betting on whether Yisu dared to kill him. Yisu sighed and withdrew his sword. Junemo won, or he won the bet. However, under such circumstances, who in the world dared to make such a bet except for second brother of the academy? Or Junemo predicted that Yisu would definitely withdraw his sword. Then was it still a bet? The wide and straight iron sword left Junmo's hand and rubbed against the air at a high speed, with a ray of bright light. Before the sword edge, the stone steps were twisted and cracked. No one dared to block it. The power of this throw was vaguely similar to Lu Bai's sword from outer sky. Just when Qin Yan's eyes were about to fall on the chessboard, the iron sword arrived. The iron sword cut off his eyes and fell on the chessboard. After 16 years, the word Ji that Qi Nian said was still floating inconspicuously in the autumn rain. The autumn rain was silent, but the temple collapsed. Amidst the continuous rumbling, the Buddhist hall gradually collapsed and turned into ruins. The smoke and dust in the sky were gradually collected by the rain. Junemo walked into the ruins of the Buddha hall. His face was a little pale and his robe was a little dirty. His eyebrows, which used to be absolutely symmetrical, were a little messy. He did not see the chessboard. After a moment of silence, he picked up the somewhat deformed iron sword from the bricks and wood in front of him and slowly straightened the iron sword with his arms. Although it was not too straight, it was enough to chop someone. Then he looked at Qi Nian. The president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple recovered some of his cultivation after a moment of breathing. His left hand trembled. He picked up the Yulan bell left by Buddha from the pool of blood in front of him and threw it to the steps. Junemo did not even look at it. He stretched out his left hand and grabbed the bronze bell in the air. The remaining Buddha nature in the Yulan bell felt the disrespect of this hand and trembled angrily. Junmo's left hand was very steady. His knuckles were slender and the Buddha light of the bronze bell seeped out from his fingers. His knuckles were slightly white and he silently exerted his strength. With a cracking sound, the Yulan bell turned into scrap metal in his palm. Ninkei could not touch the Yulan bell because Buddha believed that he was evil. Second brother could touch the Yulan bell because even the aura left by Buddha could feel his disrespect, but could not think that he was evil. Junemo was righteous and confident. He would not be confused by anything. Moreover, he hated Buddha the most in his life. He thought to himself, if I am evil, then what are you, Buddha? The sacred object of the Buddhism sect had been destroyed. As the bell-bearer, Master Buoshu's heart ached and his Buddhist heart was greatly shaken. His face turned extremely pale and he shouted angrily, Junemo, how dare you? Junemo glanced at the president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple, and tightened his right hand that was holding the iron sword. With a swoosh, the remaining left arm of Buoshu was detached from his body and fell into the autumn rain. I'm really holding on. Everyone still has the monthly tickets. Please vote for 2 more chapters to encourage me. I really can't hold on any longer. I'm physically and mentally exhausted and my brain is about to run dry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 598. A scream pierced through the rain and spread to the surroundings of the dilapidated old temple. Master Buoshu looked at his broken arm in the rain, his face pale. His body with 2 bloody holes was on the verge of collapsing. As the president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple, his dharma was profound and he had perseverance. Previously, when his arm was cut off by Ninkei's padao, he had not cried out. However, his cultivation was severely damaged now, and Junmo's iron sword had cut off his arm. This was equivalent to destroying everything he had, and he could not bear it any longer. Kunimati looked at the scene in front of her and suddenly screamed. She rushed to the broken stair and hugged Master Buoshu, who was covered in blood, in an attempt to stop the bleeding. Qi Nian looked at Junemo, who was walking towards him, and chanted the name of Buddha. Because he had not spoken for too many years, his voice was a little dry and not smooth. Mr. Second is really... He could not finish his sentence because Junemo did not want to hear him at all. Junemo held the strange wide and straight iron sword in his right hand and slashed at his head. Qi Nian's face was pale. The breaking of 16 years of silent meditation had caused the shocking scene earlier, and also caused a great backlash to his Buddha heart. In addition, Ninkei had left a talisman wound on his body, and his strength had been greatly depleted. He was much weaker than when he was at his peak. But he was after all a Buddha who lived in the world. Facing the iron sword that pressed down like a mountain, he did not show any fear on his face. Instead, he stretched out his right finger and drew a circle in front of him. Qi Nian's finger trembled slightly, and he kept drawing in the air in the cold autumn rain. When one circle disappeared, another circle appeared. The big circle covered the small circle, growing and multiplying endlessly, just like the eternal halo behind Buddha. Junmo's iron sword chopped straight and cut horizontally. He was still walking the righteous path just like himself. The iron sword drew countless squares in the autumn rain, and each sword mark was of the same length and thickness. The circle drawn by his finger was extremely round, covering each square drawn by the iron sword. The rainwater that fell into the circle bounced off the moment it touched the aura. Qin Yan looked at Junmo and said in a hoarse voice, "The sky is round and the earth is square. How can you defeat me?" Junmo said indifferently, "Since you're a human, you should know that you're standing on the ground." As soon as he finished speaking, a few crisp sounds could be heard. The iron sword slashed out horizontally, chopping the Buddha's breath in the rainy sky into pieces. The square-shaped sword intent was extremely powerful as it broke through the circle. Qin Yan's expression suddenly turned serious. He chanted the name of Buddha and set up 27 layers of Buddha's aura shield in front of him. A gentleman can be deceived? Junmo let out a light shout as he held the iron sword and broke through the 27 layers of Buddhist auras. Blood overflowed from the corner of Qin Yan's mouth. His hands bloomed like a lotus in front of him, forming a powerful emblematic gesture. A gentleman can be deceived? Junmo shouted as he held his sword and broke the mantra handprint. Qin Yan spat out a mouthful of blood, but he was still determined to fight. He summoned the Dharmakaya of the Akalanatha and fought against the iron sword. A gentleman deceives you with his own methods. Junmo shouted angrily. His iron sword cut through the rain and cut Qin Yan's Dharmakaya into 2 pieces. Seeing that the arhat was seriously injured and on the verge of death, the monks in the back temple of Lank roared and walked towards the stone steps, trying to save Qin Yan's life with their own flesh and blood. Junmo's iron sword left his hand. In the whistling sound of the sword, more than 10 monks fell to the ground and died. The iron sword drew 4 straight lines in the autumn rain on the stone platform, and then returned to its original position, cutting towards Qin Yan. A straight wound suddenly appeared on Qin Yan's body. His face was extremely pale. He sat on the lotus seat and formed the emblematic gesture, closing his eyes to meditate. One thought to live, one thought to die, one thought to grow bones and flesh, one thought to be immortal and indestructible. Junmo did not care what he was doing at all. He just let the iron sword slash towards him. In the blink of an eye, the iron sword slashed 77 times. Qin Yan moved his dhyana and cycled it 11 times. His monk robes were all cut into pieces, and his bones, flesh and skin were cut into countless wounds. Those wounds were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, before they could recover, they would be cut by the iron sword again. No matter how fast Qin Yan moved his dhyana, the recovery speed of the Buddha's body could never be faster than the iron sword. At this time he was struggling to hold on. At the same time he had to suffer more pain. That pain was close to death. Even if he had a firm Buddha's heart, he could not help but feel pain between his eyebrows. The iron sword came again. Qin Yan's body was hit hard and flew backward. He hit the collapsed Buddha statue in the hall and spat out a mouthful of blood. Junmo continued to walk towards him. At this time, Yisu finally rushed to the ruins of the Buddha hall and stood in front of Qin Yan. He looked at Junmo and said, "The mute was injured first. It is not honorable to win." Junmo said, "If what you said makes sense, how can you have the face to besiege my youngest brother?" Yisu was silent and said, "Ning-Kei and the daughter of Yama are dead. It is a foregone conclusion." Today, the Lank Temple has been destroyed and countless monks have died. Does the Academy still want to destroy Buddhism? Junmo said expressionlessly, "The Buddhism sect bullied the Academy, and this bald donkey lied to my senior brother. They are hypocritical to the extreme. Such lousy dharma should be erased from the world." Yisu said, "No one wanted to kill Ning-Kei today. Otherwise, Qin Yan would not have waited for the Buddha's light to come and kill the daughter of Yama. I think the Taoism sect and the Buddhism sect have shown enough respect to the Academy, and the Buddhism sect has paid the price." Junmo said, "Do you think you don't have to pay the price for killing Sang-Sang? I don't care about the role of Taoism sect in this matter. Don't force the Academy to start a war with Taoism sect now." Qin Yan lay at the foot of the broken Buddha statue. His body was covered with wounds and looked terrible. But his expression was still calm and his voice was still firm. The daughter of Yama must die. Junemo looked at him and said, "She has never done anything wrong. Why should she pay the price for what might happen in the future? If the daughter of Yama is the original sin, then shouldn't all the descendants of the perverted monks in the world be killed? There is no such precedent in the law of the Tang Empire. That is why your actions today are unreasonable." It was quiet in the autumn rain. Everyone present knew Mr. Second of the Academy's temperament and was not surprised to hear such words. But no one really thought that he was trying to reason with them because it did not make sense. But looking at the broad straight iron sword in his hand, no one was willing to reason with him. No one expected that the person who stood up to refute Mr. Second of the Academy would be Lu Chunjia. While the princess of the Yueluan kingdom was famous for being infatuated, her status and power were not worth mentioning in front of Junemo of the Academy and the world wayfarers of the various sections. But as the saying goes, the ignorant are fearless and the fearless are also fearless. She had long lost her heart. That was why she dared to attack Sang Sang and speak now. Lu Chunjia slowly stood up and wiped the rain off her face. She looked at Junemo and said, "May I ask, Mr. Second, if everything was done according to the law of the Tang Empire, why did your iron sword kill so many people today?" Junemo said, "The law of the Tang Empire says that the murderer must die." Lu Chunjia said, "But no one knows if Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama are dead or not. Since we cannot be sure if they are dead or not, then there is no murderer in the Lank Temple." Junemo said after a moment of silence, "That makes sense." Kunimati hugged Master Bushu and looked at his pale face. Tears streamed down her face. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Junemo, scolding him in grief and indignation. "The Academy has always thought that you are in the right. In fact, since Kuhauren, that goddamn lunatic, when have you ever been reasonable? Look at how much pain the chief monk is in." Junemo raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard the old woman's disrespectful words about youngest uncle. He looked at Yisu, who was standing in front of Qin Yan, and suddenly tightened his grip on the iron sword in his right hand. Yisu's expression suddenly froze. Master Bushu, who was in Kunimati's arms, suddenly opened his eyes as if he had seen something terrifying. Then a straight ray of light lit up in his eyes and he died. Kunimati did not react for a moment and looked at the old monk in her arms. The chief monk of the commandment yard of the Xiankong temple had died just like that. Qin Yan was extremely shocked. He suddenly raised his head and looked angrily at Junemo. Lu Chunjia had thought that she had used her words to force the righteous Mr. Second of the Academy. She did not expect such a tragedy to happen. Her face was pale as she murmured, "Why? Why?" Junemo said, "Sang Sang is innocent, but the bald donkey killed her heart. As the ancient saying goes, those who kill the heart shall die." Kunimati's despairing cries rang out in the autumn rain. The Lank Temple, the oldest Buddhist temple in the world, had suffered unprecedented damage today. The stone steps were destroyed, the courtyard walls collapsed, the halls were broken, and the rear hall was in ruins. Many corpses lay on the stone ground between the halls. Blood mixed with rain and flowed silently on the green stone slabs. It looked extremely tragic. Countless monks in the Lank Temple had died. The essence of Buddhism that had been accumulated for generations had been destroyed by an iron sword in this battle. Decades ago, Lotus, who was still the great divine priest of judgment of the West Hill Divine Palace, had secretly commanded the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine to massacre countless cultivation sects in front of the Lank Temple. However, they did not attack the Lank Temple. Decades later, another tragedy happened in the Lank Temple. However, the Lank Temple itself was the one that suffered the most. From today onwards, the Lank Temple would not be able to maintain its current status in the cultivation world. Today, too many people have died. Master Qishan looked at the corpses of the monks lying in the autumn rain. He looked at the bloodstains. It was hard to tell whether he was sad or happy. There was no emotion in his voice either. He looked at Junemo and smiled with difficulty. He said, "Although the chessboard has been destroyed, I am not sure if Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama are dead or alive." "Junemo, please stop." Junemo was silent. He wanted to kill Qin Yan. Neither Yisu nor Tang, who had been silent, could stop him. This was the principle of the Academy. However, the one who spoke was Master Chishan. He had to be careful, because he knew that the master was not like those hypocritical monks in the Buddhism sect. I have been too embarrassed to report to you, but I have been suffering for a few days. Today is so sad that I can only write one chapter. Tomorrow will be better. It will be the third chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 599. The hall was in ruins and no one had seen the chessboard. When they heard Master Chishan say that the chessboard had been destroyed, they were shocked speechless. They thought that even if Qin Yan had broken his 16-year silent meditation and Mr. Second of the Academy's iron sword, they should not have been able to destroy the chessboard left by Buddha. What was even more shocking was that Master Chishan said that he was not sure whether Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama were dead or alive. The Lang Temple's abbot's left leg had been cut off by the iron sword. He lay in the autumn rain covered in blood. His face was pale as he looked at the body of Master Bueshu in Kuni Mati's arms. After a long while he suddenly cried in pain. Thinking of the countless fellow disciples who had died today, the abbot's body could not stop trembling. Then he crawled towards the stone steps with his hands on the ground. He cried at Master Chishan, "Why did you do this? Do you want the entire human world to perish? Lan Ku has already been destroyed. Can't it stop the destruction of the world?" Master Chishan looked at his disciple with pity, and then at Qin Yan. He said slowly, 100 years ago, I left the Xiankong temple and came to the human world. I have lived here for the longest time, and my love for this place is deeper. However, we have chosen different paths to protect the human world. Qin Yan said, Uncle, have you ever thought that the path you have chosen for the human world is different from most people's, and it is very likely to be wrong? A smile appeared on Master Chishan's tired face. He said, I am Chishan, but I am not Chishan. Therefore, the path I have chosen in this life has always been a divergent path in the eyes of the world. After saying this, the master slowly closed his eyes and leaned into Monk Guanhai's arms. Monk Guanhai's body was cold and wet from the autumn rain. At this moment, even his heart felt cold and wet. He stretched out his trembling finger and placed it in front of the master's nose. Tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes. The great master passed away. Decades ago, Master Chishan turned the tide and saved countless people. However, he contracted a serious disease and his cultivation state was destroyed. After fighting with the disease for many years, his blood had already dried up. Now he was old and weak. Today he helped Ning Ke defeat Qin Yan with his mantra and opened the chessboard world by force. His life was coming to an end. Junemo looked at the emaciated body of the master in Monk Guanhai's arms and slowly bowed. The abbot of the Lank Temple, who had been scolding the master, suddenly stopped talking. He cried and laughed nervously before kneeling down. In front of the stone steps of the Buddhist hall, everyone who could still stand bowed to the Grandmaster's body. This respect was not because Master Chishan was the true elder of the Lank Temple and the most senior Vedanta in the Buddhism sect. It was because the master had used his life to prove his kindness and compassion. Even if most people in the world would oppose the master's choice before he died, no one dared to question his virtue. The autumn rain dispersed slightly. A scholar appeared in front of the ruins of the Buddhist hall. The rapid rain had completely soaked his cotton-padded robe. The clotted cotton on the outside of the cloth trembled slightly like frosted fruits. Hearing the cries from the stone steps, he walked over, and everyone hurriedly made way for him. Eldest senior brother walked to Master Chishan's body, and thought of the letters they had exchanged over the years. He thought of the master's earnest hopes in the letters. He looked sorrowful and squatted down to hold the master's cold right hand. He whispered a few words. Junemo looked at his back and said, The master said that youngest brother and Song Song's life and death are unknown. Eldest senior brother stood up and looked at the sky in the rain. His eyes narrowed slightly in the rapid rain, and his face looked pale and haggard. He suddenly turned and walked up the stone steps. The Buddhist hall was in ruins. Eldest senior brother gently waved his cotton sleeves, and the cotton that came out from the cracks in his clothes drifted away. The bricks and rubble around him were quickly cleared away at a speed visible to the naked eye. Junemo knew that eldest senior brother had forcefully broken through the realm too many times today. If this continued, it would cause irreversible damage to eldest senior brother's cultivation and state of mind. He said, "Senior brother, let me do it." Eldest senior brother said, "I am very anxious." He had always been unhurried when he did things and walked slowly. He was so slow that it made people panic. However, today he was the most anxious person in the world. He was naturally anxious about Ninkei's life and death. Junemo did not say anything more. He held the iron sword and stabbed it into the ground, and began to help eldest senior brother. In a very short period of time, the ruins of the Buddhist hall were cleared by the two of them. Even the foundation of the Buddhist hall was dug up by Junemo. However, they still could not find the chessboard. Could it be, as Master Chishan had said, that the chessboard left by Buddha had been destroyed? But even if it was destroyed, there should be some traces left. The autumn rain became heavier and heavier. It was dead silent around the ruins of the Buddhist hall. Other than the sound of the rain, nothing else could be heard. The rainwater gradually poured into the excavated foundation, and gradually formed puddles everywhere. Eldest senior brother looked at the puddles in the ruins, and his expression suddenly changed. In the deepest part of the foundation of the Buddhist hall, surrounded by mud walls that still had traces of the iron sword, they could vaguely see the foundation of a tower about 10 feet in circumference. It was unknown how long the tower had been buried under the Buddhist hall. It had long been dilapidated, and there was a dry well in the middle of the tower that was filled with soil. The mouth of the well had long been broken. Junemo swept to the side of the tower and stabbed it again with the iron sword. Then he shook his head. There were no gaps in the soil in the dry well, and it was directly connected to the ground. There was no passage at all. Even if Ninkei and Sangsang abandoned the black horse carriage, they could not escape from here. How could such a broken well and dilapidated walls bloom again? Yi Su and the others watched them rummage through the ruins and dig out the foundation of the Buddhist hall. They remained silent, because they knew that Mr. First and Mr. Second were on the verge of exploding. At this time, even the abbey dean of the Jisho Abbey and the chief monk of scripture did not want to provoke these two people at the same time. Eldest senior brother walked out of the ruins and stood in front of Qin Yan. He looked at him silently for a long time, and said with self-blame, "I should not have discussed this with you in Chang'an. I always thought that since you are a Buddhist practitioner, you should have some mercy in your heart." Qin Yan was covered in blood, but he looked calm. He said, "It was wrong of me to take advantage of Mr. First's trust in the Buddhism sect. But I did it because the Buddhism sect is merciful to the world." Eldest senior brother shook his head and sighed. He said, "There is no great mercy if there is no little mercy for a weak girl. Even if there is, what is the point of it?" Hearing this, there was silence in front of the ruins of the back temple. Everyone, especially Monk Guanhai and the abbot of the Lang Temple, were deep in thought. Qin Yan's expression changed slightly. "Teacher once said that I'm a bright and clear mountain stream that has never encountered a true fork in the road or swamp, and I'm much luckier than little junior brother. Up until today, when I was deceived and used by you, did I understand what teacher meant by those words, and it was also the first time I felt such pain and rage." Eldest senior brother looked at Qin Yan and continued, "I don't know how to fight, or I would definitely fight with you now. Or when I learn how to fight, I will go to the Xiankong temple to find you." Junemo looked at Qin Yan and said indifferently, "Because of Master Chishan's last wish, I will not kill you today. When the academy finds youngest brother, he will go to the Xiankong temple to kill you. If the academy cannot find youngest brother, then I will accompany senior brother to the Xiankong temple to find you. Please go back and inform the chief monk of scripture." Different words, but they were talking about the same thing. The people in the autumn rain suddenly felt cold. They silently thought that the academy was going to declare war on the Xiankong temple. Chang Zicheng of the Sword Garret leaned against the stone steps and looked at the silent Qin Yan. He could not help but think that if he were a monk of the Xiankong temple, He would definitely pray for Ninkei to be alive. If Ninkei died, could the Xiankong Temple withstand the violent revenge of the Academy? Qin Yin was not moved. He looked at the two people of the Academy in front of him and said calmly, "This is the will of the Buddha. How can mortals change it? Ninkei and the daughter of Yama must be dead. If the Academy wants to destroy Buddhism, let's see if we can." The Buddha was also a mortal back then. Junemo looked up at the stone statue of the Buddha on the peak of the Hua mountain in the rain. He looked at the solemn and compassionate face of the stone Buddha, and saw the light of Buddha in the broken palm of the stone Buddha. He was disgusted and angry. From today on, bald donkeys are not allowed to enter the territory of the Tang Empire. After saying this, his face turned slightly pale. His loose robe fluttered against the rain. The wide straight iron sword left his hand and soared into the sky. It instantly pierced through the layers of rain and stabbed at the stone statue of the Buddha on the peak of the mountain in the distance. The stone statue of the Buddha on the peak of the Hua mountain was extremely tall, as if the real Buddha was overlooking the world. Compared to the stone statue of the Buddha, the iron sword was like a very inconspicuous small iron piece. However, the iron sword was filled with Junmo's most violent emotions, the most scornful attitude, and the most absolute order. How could it be resisted by a stone Buddha that had no sense and consciousness? The right hand of the stone statue of the Buddha was cut off at the wrist. It fell from a very high place, startling the goshawk and disturbing the autumn rain. After a long time, it fell to the ground with a loud muffled sound. Several horizontal lines appeared on the face of the stone statue of the Buddha. From afar, it looked like a naughty child had naughtily flicked several lines on it with ink. The compassionate expression suddenly became extremely funny. Those lines were cut by the iron sword and penetrated deep into the back of the head of the stone statue of the Buddha. After a moment, the face of the stone statue of the Buddha began to collapse, and rocks kept falling. On the stone statue of the Buddha, giant rocks began to peel off continuously, and then the speed of the collapse gradually increased. There was a series of thunder-like crashing sounds on the peak of the Hua mountain. Countless smoke and dust rose into the sky. Even the heavy rain could not extinguish it in a short period of time. The vibration on the peak of the mountain even spread to the Lang Temple at the foot of the mountain. Hundreds of giant rocks began to roll down the mountain. The sound was like that of 10,000 horses frightening people. They followed the mountain and rushed towards the already broken Lang Temple. The people in the back of the temple were extremely shocked. They supported their injured companions or carried the bodies of the dead, and began to run towards the front of the temple. In the countless crashing sounds, the giant rocks that the stone statue of the Buddha had turned into easily smashed the walls of the old temple, and crushed the remains of the Buddha hall even more. They rolled over the stone floor and crushed the broken bell. It was extremely terrifying. After a long time it finally calmed down. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated. The people who had fled to the square in front of the temple gradually calmed down. They looked back and saw that more than half of the Lang Temple had been crushed by the giant rocks. The next chapter, fight for it before 12 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 600. Looking at the destroyed Lang Temple, it took a long time for people to recover from the shock. The surviving monks couldn't help but burst into tears. Some monks looked at the tall crown that was still standing upright in the autumn wind and rain. They were extremely angry but also extremely frightened. Kunimati was still holding Baoshu's body. She was already old. First she lost her son and then she lost the only man in her life. She had lost all hope. Looking at Junmo's back, she scolded in a sad voice, "You lunatics! Do you really think that the academy is invincible?" Junmo did not turn around. He took out a white handkerchief from his sleeve and slowly and seriously wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He said, "The academy is invincible." Kunimati did not expect to hear such an answer. After a moment of shock, she laughed crazily and cursed resentfully. Even if the academy is invincible, it can only be invincible in the world. One day, God will open his eyes and take you all. Just like that lunatic Hao Ran who took in that year. According to Junmo's usual temperament, it would be another storm when he heard someone call youngest uncle a lunatic. But at this time, he just stood quietly beside eldest brother and did not say a word. Qin Yen looked at the Lang temple that had been turned into a pile of boulders. He thought of the previous scene and was silent for a long time. Then he looked down at the wounds left by the 2 divine talismans on his chest, and the wounds caused by the iron sword. He thought of the ruthlessness of the academy disciples and said bitterly, "The academy is indeed a group of lunatics. But you have no fear at all. Can you find true peace?" When Cuny Maddie said those words, she thought that she would die next. She did not expect that Jun Mo would not even care about her. She could not help but feel great pain. She suddenly saw the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, standing silently outside the crowd. She said with hatred, "Mo Shanshan, everyone saw you helping the daughter of Yama escape. I'd like to see how the Great River Kingdom and the Master of Calligrapher can protect you." Hearing this, Mo Shanshan's face turned pale. She had acted subconsciously when she saw Ning Ke and Sang Sang in danger. She did not think at all. Now she thought that if Sang Sang was really the daughter of Yama, what would she do when the underworld invaded the human world and the world was destroyed? "Shanshan, come here." Right at this moment, eldest senior brother's voice sounded. Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned. She looked at the scholar who was actually not very familiar with her, and thought of the journey from the wilderness to Chang, and 2 years ago. Her heart warmed a little and she walked over to him. Eldest brother looked at the crowd and said, "Shanshan is my sworn sister." It was a simple sentence, but it had a lot of hidden meanings. In front of everyone, eldest brother said that the calligraphy addict was his sworn sister. This was a guarantee or a threat. After today, anyone who dared to harm Mo Shanshan or the Black Ink Garden would be provoking the academy. Now that the Lang Temple had been destroyed and the Buddhism sect had suffered a heavy blow, who would dare to disrespect the academy? Jun Mo suddenly looked at Tang and said, "You are not in the wilderness. What are you doing here?" Dun said, "Let me see." Jun Mo asked, "What are you looking at?" Earlier that day, Yisu had asked Tang the same question. At that time, Tang had also answered that he was here to take a look. When Yisu asked him what he was here to see, Tang's answer was that he was here to see you Central Plains people kill people. Now facing Junmo's question, Tang's answer changed. He said, "I'm here to see you kill people." Junmo nodded and said, "The academy doesn't like to kill people. If we can, we will. So you don't have to worry." Tang knew that he didn't have to worry about the academy's education of his sister, so he nodded and thanked him. Junmo said, "If youngest brother appears in the wilderness, please send him back to Chang." And Tang said, "If the daughter of Yama is with us, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything." Junmo slightly raised his eyebrows and said no more. "Let's go," eldest brother said to him, and then led Mo Shanshan to the town at the foot of the mountain. Junmo followed. Looking at the 3 figures gradually disappearing in the autumn rain, Yisu suddenly asked, "You lost 5 years of cultivation just to destroy the stone statue of Buddha to show off your power. Will you do it or not?" Tang thought of the scene where Junmo wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and shook his head. Only a madman would do it. Yisu said, "After Mr. Ku, the 2nd floor of the academy rarely stepped into the world. Many stupid people have forgotten the story of the academy. I think no one will dare to forget it after today." Tang said, "The Enlightenment doctrine is regarded as a demon by the Taoist and Buddhist sections. Now it seems that the academy is even crazier than us. No wonder the academy doesn't regard the Enlightenment doctrine as an alien as you do." Yisu said, "The Buddhism doctrine has always been doing what they think should be done. Taoism is doing what is right, while the devil's doctrine is opposing for the sake of opposing. As long as the Taoist and Buddhist sects want to do something, you will do the opposite. Only the academy does what makes them happy. That is the difference." Walking on the bluestone road in the town of Tile Mountain, Mo Shanshan felt the warm and reliable aura around her. She gradually calmed down and was no longer as confused as before. Then she realized that she had been holding a box in her hand. It was the box that was thrown to her in the black horse carriage when Ning Ke and Sang Sang broke out of the encirclement. She opened the box and found a strange thing lying quietly on the cotton surface of the box. In the middle of the two vertical frames were two connected circular frames, and in the middle of the frames was a transparent sheet. She did not know what it was made of. "This is called myopia glasses." Eldest brother looked at her and explained gently. "The thin sheet is made of high-quality crystal. It is said that it can help people with poor eyesight." Youngest brother asked sixth brother to make it. Took him a lot of effort. Emo Shanshan's heart warmed when she heard this. She took the thing out of the box but did not know how to use it. June Emo walked to the side and said indifferently, "You can use it by putting it on the bridge of your nose. Ninkei made it for you." He even asked the people in the back of the mountain to hide it from Sang Sang. "But I have already told Sang Sang." Emo Shanshan said with a smile, "Ninkei has some leisure time. At the dangerous moment just now, he only wanted to escape. How could he remember these things? I think Sang Sang threw it to me." After saying this, she put the glasses on the bridge of her nose. She turned around and the originally blurry scenery of Autumn Mountain suddenly became clear. However, this clarity was not real. It was a little distorted, so there was a sense of emptiness. In the distance, there was no one in the ruined temple and mountains. There is one more chapter. Try to get out before 2 o'clock. I must sleep early. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 601. In the late autumn of the 16th year of the Tianqi era, an autumn rain fell on the Tile Mountain, causing mudslides and landslides. The largest stone statue of Buddha in the world collapsed, burying half of the Lank Temple and turning it into ruins. The monks in the temple suffered heavy casualties, and the people and tourists who participated in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival escaped because they did not enter the temple. On the same day, Master Qishan, who was deeply respected by the world, passed away. The abbot of the Lank Temple was disheartened and retreated to the Tile Mountain. Master Qishan's last disciple, Monk Guanhai, took over as the abbot and temporarily oversaw the affairs in the mountain. This was the official statement. If the human world could continue to exist, it would be described in the history books. Perhaps the truth would only be found in the West Hill scriptures and the secret scriptures of the Buddhism sect. In the current world, only a few people knew that the disaster that almost destroyed the Lank Temple had nothing to do with nature. It was the Buddhism sect's attempt to suppress the daughter of Yama. Unfortunately, the academy stood on the opposite side of the Buddhism sect. In this battle, apart from Master Qishan's death, the president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong Temple died, Qi Nian. The world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect was seriously injured. Chang Ziqing's natal sword of the sword Garrett was destroyed, and the monks of the Lank Temple and the representatives of various cultivation sects suffered heavy casualties. Those who were lucky enough to survive were also warned not to mention this matter. Perhaps they were afraid of causing panic in the human world. The Haotian Taoism and the Buddhism sects strictly blocked the news of the daughter of Yama's arrival. Even many people in the West Hill Divine Palace did not know that their Lady of Light had become their greatest enemy. After Yuan Hao, the back of the mountain of the academy, which had not appeared in the cultivation world for many years, finally showed up in this battle. Mr. First and Mr. Second of the academy showed great power and incredible states in this battle, shocking the entire cultivation world. Many people recalled some stories in the past and once again confirmed that the academy was indeed invincible in the world. The academy had also suffered heavy losses in this battle. Ninkei, who had been gradually regarded as the future disciple of the academy who had improved his state so quickly, disappeared with the daughter of Yama and the black horse carriage. From the moment the Buddha's chessboard mysteriously disappeared, no one had ever seen the black horse carriage in the human world, and no one knew whether Ninkei and Sang Sang were dead or still living in some corner. Because of the advice of his younger brother, Master Huangyang, the Tang Emperor Li Zhongyi did not issue an edict to exterminate Buddhism. The previous ban that was issued because of Dao Shi's entry into Chang and was extended to the entire world. All the monks of the Buddhism sect were forbidden to step into the Tang Empire, except for the Guanhai branch of the Lank Temple. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. The autumn wind had turned the leaves yellow, and the wilderness was covered with frost. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been missing for a whole year without any news. But as the old saying went, even if His Majesty was dead, those who needed to marry still had to marry. The human world still followed the rules that had been repeated for tens of thousands of years and slowly moved towards the future. But this year, people's footsteps were heavier. At the beginning of this year, the situation in the Central Plains was actually very tense, especially in the eyes of the bigwigs who knew the truth of the Lank Temple's change. No matter how one looked at it, the change in the Lank Temple could be considered as the Academy protecting the daughter of Yama, so the Academy should be the enemy of the whole world. To destroy the Academy, they had to destroy the Tang Empire first. The West Hill Divine Palace could use this as an excuse to summon millions of Haotian believers in the world and launch a holy war against the Tang Empire at any time. It was also because of this that the agreement reached by the Central Plains countries in the Lank Temple to attack the Desolate Men became a piece of waste paper. When the West Hill Divine Palace ordered the coalition army to move north, the Tang Empire's Northeast Cavalry, which was supposed to be the vanguard, was excluded from the coalition army and even became the most vigilant target of the coalition army. Just as the West Hill Divine Palace coalition army and the Desolate Men fought and stopped, and it seemed that summer was about to pass, the situation in the wilderness suddenly changed drastically. The left King's Palace, who had been suffering for the past 2 years, hid in Min Mountain to recuperate for half a year, suddenly entered the wilderness again and launched an attack on the Desolate Men and the coalition army at the same time. The behavior of the left King's Palace seemed to be suicidal in many people's eyes. However, no one had expected that the unorganized grassland cavalrymen, who could only shout and wave their machetes in the past, would suddenly become a well-organized and disciplined army. The grassland cavalrymen had excellent horsemanship and amazing archery skills. In addition, they were terrifyingly well-organized and disciplined. Their strength suddenly improved several times. What was even more frightening was that the grassland cavalry of the left King's Palace seemed to be attacking both sides at the same time, but in fact, they were extremely insidious. They constantly disrupted the stable situation of the war and forced the Desolate Men and the Central Plains people, who originally had no intention of fighting, to fight fiercely with each other many times. The coalition army of the Central Plains countries was shocked by the changes of the left King's Palace cavalry. After unremitting efforts, they finally found out that there was a military counselor in the left King's Palace. The Chanyu of the palace listened to him. From the training of the cavalry to the insidious strategic arrangements, everything came from the military counselor's mind. The military counselor wore a silver mask. Seeing that the war in the wilderness was getting more and more chaotic and the price paid by all sides was getting higher and higher, even though the left King's Palace cavalry suffered heavy casualties, they still dragged the Desolate Men and the Central Plains coalition army into the bloody battlefield. The Central Plains countries finally could not stand it anymore and sent powerhouses to try to assassinate the military counselor. However, no matter whether it was the swordsmen from the South Jin Kingdom or the cultivators from the Yen Kingdom and the Song Kingdom, although they could get close to the left King's Palace, they could not succeed in the assassination. It was not until all the assassins had died that the Central Plains countries were shocked to find that there were actually dozens of powerhouses in the see-through realm beside the military counselor with the silver mask. In the face of such a situation, if the West Hill Divine Palace did not intervene, no one could do anything to that person. The situation in the wilderness became more and more complicated and dangerous. At this time, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire finally entered the wilderness. After 2 fierce battles, they finally managed to stabilize the situation in the wilderness. The grass in the depths of the wilderness was already frosty white. With the sound of hooves, dozens of riders climbed onto a meadow beside the poplar forest. Looking at the horses, one could tell that these riders were from the left King's Palace. However, it was strange that these people did not wear the clothes of the grassland barbarians, but wore black divine robes. At the front of the dozens of riders was the military counselor with the silver mask. The military counselor raised his horse and reached out to take off the silver mask, revealing a face that was severely damaged by the fire but still had its original appearance. He looked quietly at the south. This person was naturally Prince Longqing, who had escaped into the wilderness. Prince Longqing's relatives in the Yan Kingdom had always maintained close contact with the left king's palace. That was why the left king's palace had sent people to the frontier fortress of the north of Yan Kingdom to pick him up and enter the wilderness. After entering the left king's palace, Longqing assassinated the high priest of the palace in a very short period of time and subdued the other priests, showing his strength to the frightened grassland barbarians. In this year, he used the Grey Eye skill to suck the profound power of the high priest of the palace, and also suck the cultivation of 2 powerhouses in the see-through realm from the Central Plains and a senior statesman of the Desolate. His state had broken through the knowing destiny state and was even faintly about to reach the peak. However, the blood essence of the high priest of the palace and the senior statesman of the Desolate was, after all, not compatible with the Haotian Taoism skill that he had cultivated. So his aura was slightly messy and his state was still not stable enough. Standing on the meadow and looking at the indistinct mountains in the distance in the south, Longqing was silent for a long time. He thought of the things that happened in those years and could not help but sigh in his heart. He said to himself, "Such a great river man waiting for me to take him. It's a pity that you, Ningke, are already dead. Otherwise, how good would it be for me to kill you again?" The grass in the wilderness had been frosted, but the west hill was still green. Yi Hongyu appeared in the depths of the mountains, in front of the simple and ordinary Taoist temple. She wore a dark red divine robe of judgment and a divine crown on her head. She looked calm and did not knock on the door. Instead, she pushed the door open casually as if she was returning home. She said, "Uncle, long time no see." The middle-aged Taoist priest in a light green Taoist robe was washing his brush by the lake. When he heard the voice, he looked up and saw that it was her. He could not help but shake his head and said, "You're very late." According to the rules of Haotian Taoism, the 3 great divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace, the Abbey Dean of the Southern Gate Abbey of the Tang Empire, and people like Master Yen Sei, who had obtained the title of Great Divine Priest by virtue of their strength, had to come to the Jisho Abbey after being conferred the title of Great Divine Priest. Only with the approval of the Jisho Abbey could the conferment take effect. Yi Hongyu had killed the former Great Divine Priest of Judgment last spring, and ascended to the seat of heavenly black jade. She should have come to the Jisho Abbey long ago, but she did not. What was strange was that both the hierarch and the Great Divine Priest of Revelation had tacitly allowed her to do so. No one in the West Hill Divine Palace dared to object. "It's just a formality. You can come at any time." Yi Hongyu walked to the lakeside and looked at the lonely and even somewhat lifeless Taoist temple. She frowned slightly and said, "This temple is becoming more and more lifeless." The middle-aged Taoist flung the wet brush in his hand dry and led her into the house. Chapter 603. Lu Bai's name was still at the top of the second page, followed by Junemo, Yisu, Tang, and Qin Yan. Each of these names represented the most powerful cultivators in the world. Yi Hongyu looked at the hand scroll in front of her expressionlessly. She had lived in the Jisho Abbey for a period of time, but had no chance to come into contact with the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. As such, she was still a little nervous. The way the hand scroll was presented made her feel the greatness of the omnipotent Haotian once again. She slowly flipped the pages and saw more familiar or unfamiliar cultivators' names appearing in front of her. One of the names made her frown slightly. It was Longqing's name. The ink used to write Longqing's name seemed to have been mixed with a lot of water, so the handwriting on the hand scroll was very faint and a little gray. The structure of the 2 characters was obviously a little unstable, as if it could break out of the paper at any time, or disappear at any time. Yi Hongyu looked at Longqing's name and shook her head. She continued to flip the pages, but after reading the hand scroll from beginning to end, she still could not find Ningke's name. She frowned and said, "Is he really dead?" The middle-aged Taoist was hanging the brush that he had washed on the brush holder, and then he adjusted the position of the brush holder to ensure that it would be exposed to enough but not too hot sunlight. After looking at it for a while, He nodded in satisfaction. Uncle, I'm done, Yi Hongyu said. The middle-aged Taoist walked forward and closed the heavy hand scroll. He looked at her and shook his head. He said, "It's a pity to use such a precious opportunity to confirm whether Ningke is dead or alive." Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "In my opinion, the only person in the academy who can truly threaten Haotian Taoism is Ning Quebec. So whether he is dead or alive is very important to me." The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly and said, "Why do you say that?" Yi Hongyu said, "People say that the academy is faithless, but the people inside are still restricted by certain rules, such as morality, the law of the Tang Empire, etiquette, and demeanor. Mr. First and Mr. Second are naturally great people, but the destruction they can cause can be predicted if they are restricted by these rules. Ningke is not restricted by any law. If he wants to do something morality, the laws of the Tang Empire and etiquette will become meaningless to him. He will not know what demeanor is. If Ningke was in the position of Mr. First or Mr. Second, he would not have stopped after destroying the Buddha statue and the Lang Temple. He would have killed Qin Yan and found a way to destroy the Xiankong Temple." The middle-aged Taoist asked, "Why are you so sure of his actions?" Yi Hongyu said, "Because we are the same kind of people." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Perhaps you are right." Fortunately, Ningke is dead. No matter how terrible he could have become, the possibility has ended. Yi Hongyu said again, "Other than valuing Ningke, I am willing to choose the hand scroll because I do not care what I can learn from it. 2 of the 7 tomes of arcane have been lost. Yisu read 6 of them. It would be meaningless for me to read all 5 of them, let alone 1. The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, "After so many years, you still regard your brother as your goal." Yi Hongyu thought of the thunder by the Blue Lake last autumn and said coldly, "He used to be my only goal. But after last autumn, he is only a temporary goal on my path of cultivation." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Yisu should be very happy with your change." Yi Hongyu looked into the middle-aged Taoist's eyes and said, "But I am not happy because Longqing stole the tomes of arcane. I really want to kill this thief but you won't let me. Why is that?" The middle-aged Taoist did not speak. Yi Hongyu said, "I used to wonder if Longqing was the son of Yama. Since he is not, why doesn't the Divine Hall allow the judicial department to enter the wilderness to kill him? Are you raising a tiger?" The middle-aged Taoist smiled slightly and still did not speak. Yi Hongyu stared into his eyes and said, "Actually, what makes me most uneasy is what happened in the Lang Temple. Why did the Buddhism sect know that the daughter of Yama had come to the world, but our Haotian Taoism reacted so slowly? Why did the divine priest of light choose Sangsang as his successor? Did he not see through it before he died?" The middle-aged Taoist looked at her and sighed. "I know you have doubts, but your senior brother, who can answer your doubts, is still traveling in the South Sea. I am as confused as you." Yi Hongyu walked out of the hut and came to the lake. She put her hands behind her back and her robe fluttered. She looked at the green mountain in the distance behind the Taoist temple. When she lived in the temple, she and Chan Pippi were forbidden to go near the green mountain. She did not know what was in the mountain, but she clearly felt that the mountain was dangerous. Now that she had become the great divine priest of judgment of West Hill, her state was profound. Naturally, she was not as afraid as she was when she was young. She even had a strong urge to explore it. "Do you want to know what is in the mountain?" The middle-aged Taoist walked to her side and followed her gaze to the green mountain. Yi Hongyu did not hide her thoughts. She nodded. The middle-aged Taoist said, "That green mountain is the strength of our Haotian Taoism in the past and the glory of the future." Yi Hongyu vaguely guessed something. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "When will the future come?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "Probably until the person who made our Haotian Taoism no longer strong leaves." Yi Hongyu was silent for a long time. Then she said, "No one can see how far the future is." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Everyone will grow old and die. No matter how great a person is, he can't get rid of the shackles of this rule. Only eternity is truly far in the world, so the future will not be too far. No one could live forever. That was why death seemed far away to everyone, but it was actually very close. It often came without any warning and seemed to be understated. In the autumn of the 16th year of Tianqi era, many things happened in Chang'an, but what really caught everyone's attention were the funerals that happened one after another. In winter, the old Grand Secretary Wang passed away. This veteran of 3 dynasties of the Tang Empire and a bigwig who was extremely important to the balance of the imperial court. It was said that before he died, he held the chicken soup calligraphy and looked at it for a whole night. In the end, he took back his last words of letting the chicken soup calligraphy be buried with him. Then he peacefully closed his eyes forever. The old chancellor, who had fought with Grand Secretary Wang for his whole life, also passed away before the winter snow melted. Jin Wucai, whose eyes were red and swollen from crying, conveyed the last words of the old chancellor to the officials and students waiting in the manor. She said that since it was too troublesome to move his grave, he should be buried next to Grand Secretary Wang, which would be a good way to have fun. In the spring of the next year, Chu Xiongtu, the 16th Guard General of the Tang Empire, also passed away due to illness. Soon after, several ministers passed away. The white banners on the streets of Chang and had no chance to be taken down. These old ministers and generals who passed away were already very old. It was normal for them to occasionally catch a cold or even grow old naturally. But because they had left for too long, half of the mainstays of the 2 dynasties in the Tianqi era had passed away in this year, which inevitably made people feel a little uneasy. What was even more unsettling was that the lung disease of the Defender General of the state Su Shi was getting worse. Even if he was forced to return to the southern front line by His Majesty, the humid air seemed to be unable to alleviate his illness as it had in previous years. And according to the news from the palace, the coughing in the imperial study was also getting lower and lower. His Majesty's temper was getting worse and worse, and the number of times he scolded an idiot was far higher than the average number of years ago. The students of the front yard of the academy graduated. Most of the foreign students returned home, and 1/3 of them stayed in Chang'an. The Tang students either joined the court or joined the army. Chu Xiongtu's grandson, Chu Zhongtian, followed his grandfather's last words and started from the basic officer of the Yulin Royal Guards. Zhong Dajuan returned to Yangguan City and immediately took over a low-ranking but extremely important official position. The Zhong family was a big family in Qinghe Prefecture. As long as he stayed in Yangguan City and did his job well, and did not make any big mistakes, he would soon be promoted again. Among these academy students, the most shocking one was Situ Ilan, the daughter of General Yun Hui and a friend of Her Highness the Princess. She actually snatched a place from the military ministry and went north to the Gushan Commandery to be a female lieutenant under Hua Shanyue's command. She had taken the first firm step towards the goal of becoming the first female general of the Tang Empire. Situ Ilan's decision shocked the whole city of Chang'an. In the beginning, people didn't understand and even mocked her. But later, they became silent and respectful. People in Chang'an experienced a change in thinking, and they learned or understood something from it. Hua Shanyue was no longer the county captain, but the military supervisor of the 3 states. In the northeast hilly area of the Tang Empire, besides the northeast border military whose main camp was in Tuyang City, he was the most powerful. After Xian Zhilang returned from the Lank Temple with the diplomatic corps, he was not affected by the changes in the Lank Temple. He successfully took over Xiaoho's position and became the great general of the north. And General Xu Cheng, because of his meritorious service in cooperating with the academy and dealing with the disguised horse gang of the northeast border military in the wilderness a few years ago, he took over Xian Zhilang's position and became the great general of the west, facing the Yueluan kingdom. Birth, old age, sickness and death were common, and so was the metabolism. During the Tianqi era, the old people who were like stars in the sky gradually left the world. Naturally, there would be new talents to fill the empty positions. The most powerful thing about the Tang Empire was that this land was most suitable for the growth of towering trees. However, many people had already noticed that as time passed, the new generation gradually took over, and Princess Liyu's power became more and more powerful. The only thing that could make the Empress's party feel relieved was that Ning Ke, who killed General Xiahou, had disappeared. If that person was still alive, then the Academy would definitely choose to support Liyu, no matter because of his close relationship with Liyu or the irreconcilable hatred between him and the Empress. These chapters are definitely mainly narration. I will try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. Now, well, I won't say anything more. It's just that I'm in a bad situation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 604. The autumn wind caused the yellowish leaves to roll about in the courtyard. Li Qingshan raised his gaze from the fallen leaves and gazed at the walls of the imperial palace nearby. He squinted his eyes slightly and took out a white handkerchief to cover his mouth. He coughed gently before carefully folding the handkerchief and hiding it in his sleeve. He was the nation master of the Tang Empire with a high status. He was famous for being a prankster in Chang'an. However, with the increase of wrinkles, he looked older and quieter. Thinking of the old people who had passed away in the past year, Li Qingshan's eyes showed a trace of worry. Although it was natural for people to grow old and die, he still felt a little sad that so many old friends had passed away in such a short time. As the Abbey Dean of the Southern School Temple of Haotian Taoism, he could not help but worry whether this represented some kind of God's will. In the palace, the emperor seemed healthy, but in reality, his body was deteriorating with each passing year. Su Shi had aged even more in the last 2 years. If the people of his generation were still alive, then they would all be old. How could they not worry about the future of the great Tang? If the headmaster was always there, the Tang Empire would not have any problems. Even if there were some problems, they would just be some ripples in the pond. However, the headmaster would leave one day. A yellow oil paper umbrella was quietly placed on the shiny black wooden floor. He Mingqi knelt behind Li Qingshan and did not see the worried look on his teacher's face. He whispered, "The God-stunning array is related to the safety of the Tang Empire. The array has always been kept by the Southern School Temple. Uncle Master Yen Sei passed it to Ning Ke, but senior brother Ning Ke has been missing for a long time. We should take it back and return it to His Majesty to avoid suspicion. It seems inappropriate to keep it in the academy." Li Qingshan shook his head and said, "Since senior brother passed it to Ning Ke, the academy can temporarily keep it. Remember, although we are from Taoism, we must understand the true meaning of the academy to the Tang Empire." He Mingqi agreed. Li Qingshan turned around and looked at the chessboard in front of him. He reached out and gently picked up a black chess piece in the middle of the chessboard. He said, "Compared to the Lang Temple, my chess skills are extremely ordinary or even terrible. However, I am confident that I can compete with the monks in the Lang Temple in terms of understanding the way of heaven from the chessboard. One night, I once saw a horse carriage blocking the road on the chessboard. I did not know what it was, but now that I know that night was the beginning of Ning Ke's enlightenment, I can vaguely understand something. It's fine if he dies, but if he doesn't, it will really be trouble for the Tang Empire." He Mingqi understood what his teacher meant. If Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama were dead, then the world would continue to move forward peacefully. If Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama were still alive, then what would the academy's attitude be? What should the great Tang do? Would he become the enemy of the entire world? Li Qingshan stared at the chessboard silently for a very long time. The fallen leaves in the courtyard were still rolling, making a rustling sound. If I am still alive when His Majesty leaves, I will stand by Her Highness and support Princely Huiyuan to inherit the throne. If I die, I hope you can lead the Southern Gate Temple to do the same," Li Qingshan suddenly said. He Mingqi was shocked and suddenly looked up at his teacher. Who would inherit the throne of the Tang Empire was a matter that no one dared to openly discuss in the past few years. However, as the coughing in the imperial study became deeper and more uncomfortable, there was finally such a discussion in Chang'an. However, when it came from Li Qingshan's mouth, it was completely different from the discussion in the tea house or on the street. Because in his opinion, His Majesty would not be able to hold on for too long even if he could. What shocked He Mingqi even more was the teacher's choice. Everyone in the Tang Empire knew that the Empress and the Nation Master were very close. So why did he choose to support Li Yu and her brother? He Mingqi immediately thought of the letter that Ning Ke sent back to Chang, and from Qinghe Prefecture last summer. At that time, Li Qingshan asked him to give the letter directly to Her Highness, so he became more and more confused. Teacher, why? He looked at Li Qingshan and asked in a daze. Li Qingshan looked at the black chess piece that he had placed in the corner of the chessboard. He was silent for a long time again until the rustling sound in the courtyard was crushed by the autumn wind. Then he said in a low voice, because the Empress is the saintess of the devil's doctrine. The Empress of the Tang Empire was the saintess of the devil's doctrine? He Mingqi was so shocked by this that he fell on the cattail hassock. He looked at Li Qingshan with an expression of disbelief. Li Qingshan laughed at himself sadly and said, "Many years ago, I promised His Majesty that I would keep this secret until the grave. However, it is too unfair to the Tangs who do not know this secret." He looked at his most loyal disciple and said, "Don't doubt the truth of this matter. Even the headmaster of the academy could not cure His Majesty's old illness because of the Empress's methods." He Mingqi was so shocked that he trembled slightly and did not dare to answer. Of course, these are all in the past. They were all things that happened before they fell in love with each other. So I have always regretted that they had to pay such a high price to understand each other's feelings. Li Qingshan said slowly, "I believe that the Empress would not betray His Majesty. So does the Academy. That is why she has always been the Empress. However, what about after His Majesty's death? Li Yu and Huiyuan are not her biological children. Her son is still young. Do we really need a saintess of the devil's doctrine to lead the Tang Empire forward?" Apart from life and death, there were also old age and illness. For the officials of the imperial court, old age and illness were the best reason for them to retire, although it was often not the real reason. In the early spring of the 17th year of Tianqi era, Zhang Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, suddenly resigned due to illness. It had been less than a month since Wang Shichen, the Empress, lost another arm. Since then, Zhang Jing, the Grand Secretary, and his wife did not come out of the mansion. It was said that the Grand Secretary and his wife spent all day in the backyard of the mansion growing flowers and weeding for fun. Their days were very leisurely. Zhang Jing, the Grand Secretary, put down the flower hoe in his hand and felt a little hot. Just as he opened his clothes a little, he was hit by the slightly cold autumn wind and could not help coughing. Mrs. Zhang hurriedly helped him to sit down in the pavilion and served him hot tea. Zhang Jing looked at his wife's haggard face and could not help but sigh. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but did not know where to start. There were not many people in the autumn pavilion in the tranquil garden. The couple was drinking tea and resting in the pavilion. They sat opposite each other in silence. Mrs. Zhang suddenly burst into tears and said with a trembling voice, "How could the child in my belly be the daughter of Yama?" Hearing this, the wrinkles on Zhang Jing's face seemed to deepen and he remained silent. They were Song Song's biological parents, so the Academy did not hide the truth about the destruction of the Lank Temple. In fact, the rumor that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama had long spread outside of the Tang Empire. Even in Chang'an there were people secretly discussing it. Zhang Jing's resignation as the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library was naturally related to this matter, but no one dared to mention it yet. Mrs. Zhang wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and calmed herself down. She looked at him and said, "That person is still in the front hall. Do you really not want to see him?" Zhang Jing thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, "Since he came from Qinghe Prefecture to Chang'an, he will not be satisfied until he sees me. All right, I will go and see him. I want to see what dirty thoughts they have." The middle-aged scholar who was drinking tea and waiting in the front hall of the scholar's mansion was Cui Xiu. He was a powerful figure in the Cui family of Qinghe Prefecture, and had a complicated relationship with Zhang Jing. Zhang Jing looked at the scholar and thought of what happened in the past. He could not help but frown and said, "The Cui family has always been unwilling to enter Chang'an. Brother Ming Mei, why did you come all the way here?" Cui Xiu raised his eyebrows and said unhappily, "We haven't seen each other for so many years. Are you not even willing to call me brother-in-law?" Zhang Jing said, "Your sister and I separated 16 years ago. I really don't know how to call you brother-in-law." Cui Xiu restrained his anger and said indifferently, "Since you asked me why I am here, I will tell you. My sister has not remarried since she returned to Qinghe Prefecture, and has always missed you. The old master wants to ask for your opinion. Zhang Jing frowned even more and said, What do you mean? Cui Xiu said, The Cui family is willing to let bygones be bygones and send my sister back to reunite with you. Zhang Jing said angrily, When I entered the imperial rankings, your Cui family instigated the censor to kidnap me to marry. I admit that I coveted the reputation of the Qinghe family, and I did want to grow old with your sister. However, I didn't know that Miss Cui was so arrogant and ruthless. It was my fault that I took a concubine, but she tried to murder my poor daughter. How could I tolerate that? Bygones are bygones and there is no possibility of reuniting them. Cui Xiu was an important figure in the Qinghe Prefecture. Even if he came to Chang'an, he was still a bigwig in the Prime Minister's mansion. He had never been humiliated like this before. He rebuked angrily, My sister knew that your daughter with that lowly servant was evil, so she wanted to kill her. You don't care about her friendship and speak like this. Don't think that you can hide everything forever. Yes, the news that your daughter is the daughter of Yama is still sealed, but the West Hill has sent news that the Divine Hall is ready to remove her title. Do you understand what this means? Zhang Jing's face was as cold as frost. When he was about to hit the table, his wife rushed out from behind the curtain and scolded with tears in her eyes, The Cui family is full of evil. Cui Xiu did not want to argue with this woman. He stood up and casually bowed to her. He said coldly, Judging from the situation in the court, Prince Huiyuan will ascend the throne. It does not matter whether you are there or not. This is the last chance that the old master is giving you. Since you do not want to cherish it, don't blame the Cui family for being merciless in the future. Zhang Jing said coldly, I used to be the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library. My position in the Imperial Court was only below that of the Prime Minister. Considering the old master's temperament, if it weren't for me, he wouldn't have lowered himself to allow your sister to return home. Do the families from Qinghe County think that I don't even understand this? Cui Xiu sneered and said, That's all right. I just want to remind you that when the West Hill Divine Palace announces to the world, millions of Haotian believers in the world will know that your daughter is the daughter of Yama. By then, let's see if your Grand Secretary mansion can still have a moment of peace. Let's see how many people in Chang and will come to burn your house. Zhang Jing squinted his eyes and said, Are you threatening me? Cui Xiu said, What if I am? Zhang Jing said angrily, The families from Qinghe County are indeed lawless. How dare you threaten an imperial court official in Chang? Do you really think that the law of the Tang Empire does not exist? Cui Xiu sneered and said, The law of the Tang Empire? There are some things in the world that the law of the Tang Empire cannot control. At this moment, a voice came from outside the hall. Can the Academy do what the law of the Tang Empire cannot control? As I was writing, the power went out again. Luckily, I had already finished writing this chapter, so I tried to update it with high tech, but it didn't work, so I could only go on QQ and ask someone to help me talk in the book review section. I caught Butterfly Blue King, who was also staying up all night writing or playing games. I didn't even have time to post the karaoke. Thank you so much, that was too close. I almost thought I wouldn't be able to update anymore. Luckily there was a power call. I learned my lesson. I'd better get a 3G phone. By the way, is this my retribution for not wishing you a happy holiday yesterday? There's still one more chapter, but I'm going to lie down for a while. The third chapter should be out very late. Everyone can sleep first and read it tomorrow after waking up. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 605. Before he finished his sentence, Chan Pippi walked in. He looked thinner than usual, but no matter how thin he was still a fatty, especially when compared to Tang Xiaotang beside him. Cui Xiu could not help but shiver when he heard that. He was about to say something polite and leave, but Chan Pippi did not give him the chance. He grabbed his collar and shouted, "Get lost!" Cui Xiu turned pale with fright. However, he soon realized something strange. The force on his neck was not strong, but the fatty's face was red, and it was obvious that he had used all his strength. So it turned out to be a scholar without the strength to truss a chicken? Naturally, he was not from the legendary second floor. At most, he was an ordinary student of the academy. As a bigwig of the Chui family in Qinghe County, Chui Xiu was not afraid of an ordinary student of the academy. He was ashamed and angry when he thought of his previous fear. He shouted, "How dare you? How dare you commit violence? Guards!" The door of the scholar's mansion opened to welcome Chan Pipi and Tang Xiaoteng. Before the door was closed, the stewards and servants of the Chui family, who were waiting on the street outside the mansion, heard their master scolding and rushed in. Chan Pipi found that he could not move them and could not help but feel ashamed. He let go of his hand awkwardly and looked back at Tang Xiaoteng. He said, "I don't want to lower myself to their level." Tang Xiaoteng sighed and turned to the fierce stewards and servants. She rolled up her sleeves and said, "I can't do all the physical work in the future, can I?" A series of clear sounds rang out in the courtyard. The stewards and servants of the Chui family, who had rushed into the scholar's mansion, did not even realize what was happening before they were knocked to the ground and cried out in pain. The goal of the girl from the Devil's Doctrine was to become the strongest woman in the world. It did not take much effort to deal with these stewards and servants. It was clean and neat, and could even be described as refreshing. Chui Xiu's expression changed when he saw his servants with broken legs and bleeding in pain. He knew that something was wrong and was about to reveal his identity. However, he did not expect Tang Xiaoteng to be more decisive than Chan Pipi. She grabbed his neck and threw him out of the mansion's wall like a chick. Chui Xiu's body flew over the wall and landed on the ground. He didn't know which leg of his was broken, but he almost fainted from the pain. Then Tang Xiaoteng threw all the people who had rushed into the scholar's mansion out. However, the stewards and servants did not receive the same treatment as Chui Xiu. Instead, she kicked them out of the wall like stones. There were sounds of air being pierced, and there were screams and bangs. Chan Pipi was envious when he saw Tang Xiaoteng kicking people like stones. He wished he could change to the Devil's Doctrine. He thought that if he had known this earlier, he would have used the excuse of being seriously ill or escaping the death of his mother. How could he be stuck between the big families of Qinghe Prefecture and the Grand Secretary Zeng Jing? The position of prefectural magistrate of Chang and city was extremely important and difficult. Shangguan Yongyu had been able to sit in the position for so many years and had so much money in his hands. He relied on the 4 words "slippery hands" and smoothing things over. Seeing that he could not get out of this situation, he began to think about how to smooth things over today. He first sent his subordinates to help Chui Xiu into the carriage for treatment, and then prepared to enter the mansion to ask for some mercy from the Grand Secretary. Just then Zeng Jing sent Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaoteng out of the mansion, and they met at the gate of the mansion. Shangguan Yongyu looked at the handsome fat man and suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He remembered the case of the handmaiden of the old brush pen shop, harboring a fugitive 2 years ago in the Chang and local government. That year, Lord Shangguan first used illness as an excuse, and then knocked himself unconscious with a stick to get out of this case. It was not until a long time later that he knew that the handmaiden of Mr. 13 of the Academy was actually the separated daughter of the Grand Secretary Zhang Jing. And it was a fat man from the Academy who took the handmaiden away in front of Zhuge Warren and Wang Jinglu of the Imperial Center Administration in the Cha and local government. Shangguan Yongyu felt cold all over, and thought that it was fortunate that he did not have time to smooth things over. He first bowed to Zhang Jing, the Grand Secretary, and then suddenly turned around and sternly scolded his subordinates. "What are you still doing? Hurry up and bring these bad people back." The yamen runners and constables of the local government were instantly dumbfounded, thinking that when had their lord been so righteous? Even if the Grand Secretary was not someone to be trifled with, this was the Chui family of Qinghe County, and his attitude was extremely gentle before. Although they were cursing in their hearts, there was no reason not to obey the lord's order. A yamen runner walked forward and pulled Chui Xiu off the carriage. He took out the iron chain and was about to tie him up. Cui Xiu was shocked and speechless. He thought that the prefectural magistrate's expression was extremely gentle when he revealed his identity. Why did he suddenly change his attitude? Chun Pippi looked simple and honest, but in fact he had a crystal heart. How could he not understand Shangguan Yongyu's meaning? He nodded with satisfaction and said, "Lock these people up. They are not allowed to come out until I return to Chang'an." Tang Xiaotang glanced at him and thought that he might be gone for 2 or 3 years on this long journey. Did he want the Chang and local government to lock these people up for 2 or 3 years? Cui Xiu understood at this time that he had really met a big shot, and that the other party was very likely to be a teacher from the second floor of the academy. He did not want to be taken advantage of, and said repeatedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's a misunderstanding. I guess you don't know that I'm..." He had thought that even if the other party was from the second floor of the academy, he would not humiliate the Qinghe County families that had been passed down for thousands of years if he revealed his family background in front of so many people. However, he did not expect that Chun Pippi did not even bother to listen to him. He waved his hand and said, "Youngest brother once said in the letter that there are a bunch of idiots in Qinghe County. Do I have any interest in knowing?" Cui Xiu only felt a tightness in his chest, and the pain in his foot seemed to have suddenly intensified. His face turned pale. Shangguan Yongyu stood beside Chun Pippi and stroked his 3 strands of messy beard. He said awkwardly, "The laws of the Tang Empire are ironclad and cannot be violated. How can the academy be an exception? The Chang and local government can't lock people up at will." Chun Pippi knew that he was a smart person, but he did not have time to play tricks. He said, "Breaking into the mansion and attempting to murder an imperial court official, you can just find any law to use. Don't tell me you don't know how to do it." Shangguan Yongyu almost pulled his beard off. He said with a bitter smile, "If I filter it carefully, I might filter out more than a dozen crimes. I don't know which one to use." Chun Pippi asked, "What's the severity?" Shangguan Yongyu was a scoundrel, despicable and vulgar, but he did have some ability. He said casually, "Attempting to murder an imperial court official, even if he failed, he should be beheaded or banished for 3,000 miles. If he is accused of breaking into a private house, the heaviest punishment is imprisonment in the mine for 3 years. If he is accused of framing..." Chun Pippi's eyes brightened when he heard 3 years in the mine. He said, "This is good." Shangguan Yongyu said helplessly, "But the Grand Secretary's mansion is not a private house." Grand Secretary Zheng Jing, who had been silent at the side, looked at Cui Xiu, who was sitting on the ground beside the carriage with a pale face. He gradually felt happy, but his face was still expressionless. He suddenly said, "I have already resigned, so naturally it is a private house." Shangguan Yongyu's expression didn't change, but his heart was in turmoil. He thought to himself that the Grand Secretary was known for his simple life and gentle temperament, but he didn't expect that he would stab someone in the waist with just a few words. It was really amazing. It seemed that he was not thick-skinned enough, and acted too rigidly and mechanically. If he wanted to continue to climb up, he had to learn more from these old officials. Not to mention the prefectural magistrate's knowledge of officialdom, Cui Xiu knew that the 3 people in front of the mansion had casually sentenced him with a few words. He couldn't help but turn pale. He knew that with his identity, he would definitely not be sent to the mine, but his followers might not be able to escape this fate. 3 chapters completed. Oh yeah, I write such a chapter occasionally and then I realize what my favorite is. I have recommended it to everyone in YY, and now I strongly recommend it again. Struggling in the New Ming Dynasty. I like this book very much. I don't know the author, so I recommend it as a friend. P.S. It's Monday. Please support me with your recommendation tickets. If you still have monthly tickets, please throw them to me. Thank you very much. I will still write 3 chapters tomorrow, and I will work hard to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 606. In the south of Chang'an the autumn wind was chilly and there were few travelers. The sun shone through the clouds clear as water without any warmth. Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaotang were saying their goodbyes in the pavilion beside the road. Ning Ke is missing or dead. Anyway, there is no one from the academy to enter the human realm. Now that the situation is tense, the academy needs to establish its power. Since the idiots from Qinghe County have come to us, there is no reason not to make use of them. Apart from you, I am the last one. I have to do something before I leave. You also know that the situation is tense now. Although the academy is not afraid, it does not want the world to be in chaos. Why do you insist on leaving at this moment? Chun Pippi looked at the girl's beautiful face and said, things between us still need to be decided by the elders in the family. I want to know my father's attitude on this matter. After knowing that Chun Pippi's father was the legendary bigwig, Tang Xiaotang felt extremely complicated. However, she had already calmed down and asked, what if your father does not agree? The Jisho Abbey's Abidin's son wanted to marry a girl from the devil's doctrine. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed that this matter would eventually come to a tragic end. Chun Pippi said, I asked for his opinion because I respect my father as a son. Since the teacher did not object to us being together, then it does not matter whether he agrees or not. If he disagrees, I will come back. Will he imprison me? Or does he want to be beaten by the teacher again? Tang Xiaotang smiled and said, how can he laugh at his own father like this? Chun Pippi smiled and said, isn't there one in front of you? Tang Xiaotang asked again, are you going to the South Sea directly, or go to the Jisho Abbey first? Chun Pippi's smile faded and he said seriously, I will go to the Jisho Abbey first and then find a chance to go to the West Hill Divine Palace to figure out what happened in the Lang Temple last year. Also, the West Hill Divine Palace seems to be ready to reveal Song Song's identity. If this really happens, even if Ning Ke and Sang Sang reappear in the world, they will face endless pursuit. I want to see if I can buy some time. Tang Xiaotang nodded and said, when will you come back? The sky suddenly darkened and a cold wind blew. Gradually, raindrops fell. Chun Pippi looked at the autumn rain outside the pavilion and said, I will come back before the first spring rain next year. Take care on the road, said Tang Xiaotang. Chun Pippi said, if Ning Ke comes back, remember to inform me. How do I inform you? Tang Xiaotang asked. Chun Pippi said, just look for the Southern Gate Temple. They are the fastest to contact Haotian Taoism. Tang Xiaotang nodded and said, then take care. Chun Pippi turned around and walked out of the pavilion. Just as he was about to step into the rain, he suddenly turned back. Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said with a smile, can this little rain make you sick? Chun Pippi looked at her seriously and said, the rain can't make me sick, but lovesickness can make me sick. Hearing this, Tang Xiaotang blushed and began to roll up her sleeves out of habit. Chun Pippi was startled and said, you told me to take care of myself twice. It seems that you really want me to leave? Tang Xiaotang bit her lower lip and refused to speak. Chun Pippi was about to leave, but he still felt reluctant. He plucked up his courage and walked up to her and held her in his arms. With the young girl in his arms, he didn't feel very proud or intoxicated. His heart was anxious, and he was constantly paying attention to her two hands. He found that although the young girl's hands were clenched very tightly and were slightly trembling, she didn't seem to have any signs of making a move. He couldn't help but feel a little relieved, so he hugged her even tighter and then lowered his head. After an unknown amount of time, the two figures in the departure pavilion gradually separated. Chun Pippi walked into the rain heroically and waved goodbye without looking back. In the pavilion, Tang Xiaotang looked at his broad back and also waved, her cheeks still blushing. At this time the autumn wind was blowing, but it was unknown whether her slightly messy hair and mood were disturbed by the annoying autumn wind or by that person. Some people left Chang'an and naturally some people returned. Not long after Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaotang parted at the pavilion, a couple holding green paper umbrellas walked into the pavilion in the patter of autumn rain. The wife was a delicate girl with a gentle expression and a satisfied look. She looked at the majestic city of Chang, and in the rain a few miles away and was shocked. She whispered, "It's so high." Her husband was a middle-aged man who smiled at her words. He wore a green robe and looked gentle and elegant. His gestures were free and easy. If he did not carry a little girl on his back, who knew how many girls in Chang and would be attracted to him? The little girl was about 2 years old. Her little hands tightly grasped the clothes of the middle-aged man and tried to raise her head to look at the city wall in the distance. Her eyes were black and white as if they were painted. They rolled around and looked particularly lively. The autumn rain temporarily stopped. The middle-aged man took his wife, carried his daughter on his back, and carried his simple luggage out of the farewell pavilion. They walked toward the south gate of Chang'an. As he approached, his footsteps did not change, but they seemed to be much lighter. It was quiet at the south gate, but it was not that there were no people. On the contrary, there were many people at the city gate today. There were officers in armor, officials in Chu clothes, and several hundred green-skinned men in green clothes and shoes who were obviously not good people. There was even a eunuch. Looking at the gate, the middle-aged man did not stop but shook his head helplessly. His wife was born in the countryside. Although she had lived in the capital of the Great River Kingdom for 2 years and gained some knowledge, she had never seen such a big battle array. She could not help but feel a little frightened and subconsciously reached out to grab his sleeve. Looking at the family of 3 walking towards the city gate, the crowd gradually became restless. Even some of the men in black clothes had tears in their eyes. A man wearing the official uniform of the commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion took the lead and bowed down, followed by countless people, but their voices were not the same. "Welcome, Grandmaster. Welcome, Big Brother. Second Brother Chow. Mr. Spring Breeze Pavilion, come with me to the palace. His Majesty has been waiting for you." The family of 3 who returned to Chang, and in the autumn rain were Chow Xiaoshu of Spring Breeze Pavilion, his wife and daughter. He had planned to return to Chang and with his family last autumn, but his daughter Little Pumpkin suddenly fell seriously ill and the doctor told her not to be tired, so he delayed his return to this autumn. Chow Xiaoshu did not follow Eunuch Lin to the palace. After meeting with his brothers, he directly went to the East City's Spring Breeze Pavilion horizontal 2nd Street. As the saying goes, filial piety comes first. Eunuch Lin could only sigh helplessly and feel sorry for His Majesty. The group of people entered the old house of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Old Master Chow was too lazy to talk with his unfilial son. He carried his granddaughter and went to the backyard to pick autumn fruits to eat. As for Chow Xiaoshu's wife Lindsay, she hadn't recovered from today's repeated shocks before she was invited to the backyard by several women. Looking at his brothers in the hall, Chow Xiaoshu found that they had not suffered any pain or disaster in the past few years. He could not help but feel comforted. After a long separation, they naturally drank together and the scene was very lively. However, he noticed that one person at the table seemed to be a little silent. That person was the most trusted think tank, Chen 7. Chow Xiaoshu knew that Chen Wei's silence often represented some very difficult things, but he did not intend to discuss those things tonight, or even that thing at all. He quietly looked at the wine cup in his hand and suddenly asked, "Is the old brush pen shop still there?" As soon as this question came out, the table suddenly became very quiet. Chong San and others looked at Chen 7, but Mr. Qi shook his head, as if he had a different view on some things. Chen 7 knew that the question was directed at him, so he gently turned the wine cup and said, "The rental contracts of all the houses on Lin 47th Street have arrived. It will not be too glaring if they are all taken back." Chow Xiaoshu calmly said, "I don't care about other shops, but I rented the old brush pen shop to him. If he doesn't come back, then he will continue renting it. No one can think about taking it back." Mr. Qi finally had a chance to interrupt. He said, "The dividends of the gambling house in the western city have always been calculated, and we have saved it for Mr. 13. The house by Yanming Lake has always been looked after by our brothers." Chow Xiaoshu nodded. Chen 7 put down the wine cup in his hand, looked at Chow Xiaoshu and said, "If the rumor is true, in fact I am 90% sure that the rumor is true, we should take advantage of the fact that no one is paying attention to it. We don't owe Ning Ke anything, and there is no reason for everyone to be implicated because of him. Lao Qi, you have always been the one with the best brains among all of us. Whether it was the lawsuit with the Ministry of Revenue or the conflict with the military ministry, it was all thanks to your advice. His Majesty has always appreciated you. If it were not for the criminal record, perhaps you would have already entered the military ministry. Your thinking is not wrong. The words of an experienced and prudent person always make sense at any time and in any place. Chao Xiaoshu raised his wine cup and toasted Chun 7, and then slowly drank it up. Chun Qi sighed. He knew second brother Chao's temperament very well. Once he started talking like that, it was tantamount to saying that there was no turning back. He picked up the wine cup and drank it in one gulp. He felt a bit bitter. As expected, Chao Xiaoshu continued, but Lin 47th Street is not the public property of the gang. It is my private property, so I want to maintain the status quo for the time being. Looking at his most respected brother, Chun 7 was still a little unwilling. He said anxiously, this matter is too big. Not to mention the Fish Dragon gang. Even the Imperial Court and the Academy can't handle it. Chao Xiaoshu put down the wine cup and calmly said, there are some things in the world that have nothing to do with whether they can handle it or not, but whether they should handle it or not. On that rainy spring night, I invited Ning Ke to go to the Spring Breeze Pavilion with me in front of the old brush pen shop to kill people. He didn't ask me who I was, so now I don't want to know who he is. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been missing for a whole year. No one knew where they had gone. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Logically speaking, the two of them should be dead, and the prefectural magistrate of Chang and had already issued a death certificate. However, in fact, many people believed that they were not dead. Some people didn't believe that Ning Ke and Sang Sang were dead because their bodies were not found in the Lang Temple. Some people didn't believe it because they didn't want Ning Ke and Sang Sang to die. The headmaster looked at the crab that looked as good as before. In fact, the crab's shell and flesh had been peeled off, and even the smallest piece of flesh had been peeled off. He said, the fun of eating crab is to do it yourself. Whether chewing or peeling, what fun is there in this situation? In the autumn of last year, a scholar left the Lang Temple and then appeared in the field deep in the west of the wilderness. In front of him were hundreds of monks with profound dharma. Those monks looked at the gentle and dusty scholar as if they were facing a formidable enemy. A voice that could only be described as magnificent sounded in the field. The voice first chanted the name of Buddha and then indifferently asked, Mr. First, what brings you to our Xiankong temple? Eldest brother replied, greetings, chief preaching monk. I want to know if you have seen my youngest brother. In the following 3 days, the bell in the Xiankong temple rang loudly and the light of Buddha shone brightly. There seemed to be a wind blowing in the temple. The scholar found nothing and left. In the spring of this year, the scholar visited the 72 temples of the Yueluan kingdom. Every time he went to a temple, he would take out a portrait and ask the monks in the temple, have you seen my youngest brother and this little girl? In the summer, the scholar visited the Taoist temple of the Song kingdom and found nothing. In autumn, the scholar returned to the Lang temple and asked the abbot of the Lang temple, Monk Guan Hai, to mobilize more than 1,000 workers to dig up a few huge rocks in the back of the temple. Then, he stood in the ruins and looked at the broken well and ruins for a long time. He always felt that it was his responsibility not to know whether his youngest brother was alive or not. After a while, he came to a very shabby Taoist temple and knocked on the door politely. He took out the wrinkled portrait and looked at the old Taoist in the temple. He coughed uncomfortably and then asked in a slightly hoarse voice, if you come from the Tile Mountain town, have you seen these two people? The old Taoist had no idea what he was talking about, and did not understand how the scholar knew that he came from the Tile Mountain town. He shook his head in confusion. There was no disappointment on the scholar's face. He calmly said goodbye to the old Taoist and turned to leave the Taoist temple. He went to the next place. From autumn to autumn, for more than 300 days a year, the eldest brother of the academy searched for the traces of Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the world. He went to 400 Buddhist temples, 2,100 Taoist temples, 47 cities, and traveled all over the mountains and seas. He was tired and haggard and covered with dust, but he never stopped. The autumn rain fell on Chang'an. A cat was lying on the wall of the old brush pen shop. It was wet all over and screamed at the sky. Then it jumped into the small courtyard and walked into the bedroom with familiarity. It lay down on the bed and wiped the rain off its body with the quilt. This small courtyard had been uninhabited for a long time. The hateful young man who liked to hit it with stones had died somewhere. Therefore, the cat felt that its current life was very happy. It slept sweetly on the dusty quilt. It slept on its stomach on its back, with its tail between its legs, holding its tail, or with its 4 feet facing the sky. It changed countless positions and slept for many days. Finally, it felt a little bored. The cat bent its 2 front legs and put its head on its soft paws. It looked at the door with its head slightly tilted. It suddenly felt a little lonely, and even began to expect to hear the sound of someone pushing the door open. The servants in the house by the Yanming Lake had either been dismissed or returned to the Grand Secretary's mansion. There was no light in the whole house, making it seem particularly deserted. The lotus leaves in the lake were withered and swayed slightly in the autumn rain. No one knew if any of the lotus leaves still remembered the thunder and the things that happened in the past. A cold sun hung over the wasteland. The yellow grass was covered with frost. Even if 2 finger-sized small fish trapped in the pond wanted to help each other, the foam that they spat out would be frozen into ice in a very short time. Suddenly, the shallow pond became deeper. The wheels roared past. A black carriage rushed out of the air with a violent momentum and landed heavily on the slightly hard ground of the wilderness. It continued to rush forward at an amazing speed, as if it wanted to catch up with the distant sun. This chapter has 5,000 words. I don't know when I can write the next chapter. Don't wait for me. Go to bed early. I will continue to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.